And good afternoon to everyone out there in Irish Breakdown land. I am Vince D'Addario. That is Brian Driscoll, and we are back. It is a Tuesday. It is August 3rd, and we are right up against fall camp. And I'm pretty excited about it. And so what we're going to do today, we are going to jump right into some more game previews. We're going to talk about the Toledo Rockets, as well as the Purdue Boilermakers. We're going to jump into those two. And yes, every time we have planned this, some sort of breaking news has happened. And guess what? There was a little bit, an eensy-weensy bit of breaking news last night, Brian, that there is going to be a commitment announcement Wednesday. So it's kind of breaking news, but not one where we needed to change everything up, right?
Sure. Yeah, Tobias Merriweather, who is the number one receiver on the board for Notre Dame, has been for a long time. Everybody knows how I feel about Tobias Merriweather. He is going to make his commitment known wherever it's going to be tomorrow at 5 o'clock. So we will have our normal 1 o'clock show tomorrow. 1 o'clock show tomorrow. And then at 5 o'clock, we'll go live again and we'll carry his commitment announcement. He has said he's going to it's going to be on CBS Sports, but it's also going to be on his Instagram feed. So we will carry that live. He's going to make whatever decision he's going to make, and we're going to break it down. And look, everybody knows my stance on giving things away and all that other kind of stuff. But here, what I've said all summer, I mean, we've said this for months, is if Tobias Merriweather carries his recruitment out into the winter like he has said he was going to do, I was nervous about it. If he made a decision this summer, I felt really good about it for Notre Dame. So the fact that he's now announcing his decision tomorrow, certainly a good sign for Notre Dame. Now it's just about, we got to find out if they were able to close or not. And so we'll talk about him. We'll talk about his recruitment. We'll talk about all that kind of stuff. So be ready to be with us for a second show tomorrow at 5 o'clock. So it's certainly big news.
Yeah, big news. And so obviously we're going to have a second commitment show as well later on this week.
Sure.
And we're going to have a post-practice show.
Decision show.
I shouldn't. Right. He's going to make a commitment. I didn't say who it was going to be towards. Right. He's going to make a commitment. And so, yeah, so we're lots of shows this week is the bottom line. So be prepared for that, because we're going to be up in your living room an awful lot this week. So hopefully that's a good thing. But today we are going to talk Toledo and Purdue. So let's kick it off, Brian. Toledo is Notre Dame's second opponent of the season. They are the first home game opponent. And this is a very interesting MAC team. This isn't your normal, your Ball State, which gave obviously Notre Dame a scare a couple of years ago. But this team has a pretty potent offense, frankly, and the defense is going in the right direction. If you're a Toledo fan, lots of positive predictions about this team going into 2021, as well as, look, for a MAC team. What was great about a MAC team is, not a lot of guys from MAC necessarily go to the next level, right? So when you give them the option of a COVID year, a lot of those guys took advantage of it. And that is the best part about this Toledo team right now, in my estimation, is that they are loaded with veterans.
They have 20 starters coming back.
Right. That's exactly right. And they've got 60 lettermen on their roster.
That's nuts.
That is insane to me, but it makes perfect sense. Like if I was playing in the MAC and you gave me an extra year to play some college football,
heck yeah.
Play ball, baby.
In a year where there's no scholarship limitations.
Yeah, good point. Yeah,
they can have 100 guys on scholarship, so they don't have to turn anybody down. So just a reminder of the rule: not only do players get an extra year, so everybody's granted year of eligibility. So even if you were a fifth-year senior last year, you can come back this year. So anyone can come back that the staff wants back. But they also removed the 85 scholarship limit, so you don't have to say, hey, sorry, we can't bring you back because we had some recruits taking your spot. We can bring you all back and we can bring those recruits in. So
crazy.
Having over 60 lettermen is a really impressive thing. Having 20 of 22 starters coming back, including all 11 on defense.
Yeah, exactly.
Which we'll get into here in a little bit, is certainly a benefit for Toledo. And before we dive too much into Toledo, I did want to thank Patrick very much for kicking things off with that super chat. Patrick said he's finally off the road and able to join. Welcome back. We have not seen you, actually. We noticed that you haven't asked any questions. Missed you guys. We missed you too, but I did watch all the shows. I missed live, so I'm pumped. I am up to date on Notre Dame football.
Nice.
And you know what?
Nice.
That is our goal. That is what we are here to do. But Vince, this is an interesting Toledo team because you mentioned the experience and all those type of things. And this is a big year for Toledo because, their head coach is Jason Candle. He took over in 2016. Well, he actually took over for the bowl game in 2015. Became the head coach the first year. They went 9-4, which was solid. You had a tough schedule, lost to Miami, Florida that year. Came out the next year, went 11-3. And it looked like they were just going to keep doing what they'd been doing, since, Matt Campbell was there. And then before him, Tim Beckman. And then, so they had been really a really good top 2 to 3 MAC team for a long time. And the last couple of years before 2020, they took a step back. They went 7-6 and 6-6. And that's not normal for Toledo. Last year was important for them because it was a shortened year and it kind of stunted how much they'd improved. They went 4-2 last year, but their 2 losses were combined 6 points. They lost by 3 points to Western Michigan and 3 points to Ball State, who Ball State was the best team in the league last year. So, and then of course you mentioned they got a lot of guys coming back from that team. You look at their schedule and, they get a chance to play Norfolk State at home before they play Notre Dame. This is going to be a rocking environment, and what's funny is you just don't expect that from a MAC team. Normally the environment's on a game, Bowling Green, Ball State. It's kind of a dull day, but because this is the first game fans have been able to be at in a long time, it's going to be a pretty hopping place, which is going to make it a little bit exciting. Go ahead, Vince.
Yeah, and I was going to say I think that's a point that I don't think a lot of people are looking at. That when I've seen some previews and listened to some people and. They're not taking into account the fact that this is the first home game for Notre Dame where fans can be there, where you can tailgate and you can have a full stadium and you can do all. I think people are taking that for granted because, look, I'm sorry, but there is no chance in my mind that Notre Dame comes out flat in this game.
No.
Because of that. It's not going to be Ball State of a few years ago.
No.
It's just not.
That doesn't mean Toledo can't hang with Notre Dame for a little bit for the reasons that you had mentioned. But yeah, this is not a game. Somebody told me, and I never heard it. I don't listen to Colin Cowherd. It's not that I dislike Colin Cowherd. I just don't listen to him. Somebody told me he predicted that Notre Dame was going to lose to Toledo. I don't know if that's true or not.
That's clickbait, man.
They're not going to lose to Toledo.
I'm sorry.
This is still a quality football team that and the reason we're emphasizing this is we're not doing the whole Lou Holtz, play up the bad teams. It's more of this team is going to give us a good test of where Notre Dame is early in the season, as will Purdue. They're both teams Notre Dame should beat. They're both teams Notre Dame should beat somewhat convincingly, but they're not bad teams, which is good for Notre Dame because it's going to allow you to give yourself a test. And so when you look at Toledo, that 4-2 last year was important. And Coach Candle's done some very interesting things. So kind of dear to my heart, he's hired a bunch of Division III coaches, which is kind of interesting. He hired Mike Hallett as one of his co-offensive coordinators. And the other co-offensive coordinator is a guy, Robert Weiner, who was a high school coach at Tampa Plant for like 15 years. And Mike Hallett was always known as a great offensive line coach. He was a head coach at Heidelberg for a long time, was a Thomas More for 3 years as well. But he was a guy that was always known as a really great offensive line coach at that level. He's now their co-offensive coordinator and has helped them. Toledo was a team that even when they weren't good, they could score. Like when they went 7-6 in 2018, they still scored 40 points a game.
Yeah, they put up numbers on offense.
Right. And in 2019, they took a step back. And then now, last year they were much better. And then on defense, they hired Vince Karras. If that name sounds familiar, he was the head coach at Mount Union for a while. His dad was Larry Karras, who's a Hall of Fame legendary great coach. Vince won several championships at Mount Union as well, was known as he was his dad's defensive coordinator for a number of years before his dad retired, and then Vince took over as the head coach. And Toledo's, whose defense was really bad for a couple of years, got a lot better. Toledo was at 26.2 points in 2017 when last time they were good. Then the next 2 years, they gave up 30.5 points and 32.2 points. And then last year, with the first year under Coach Karras, they dropped all the way down to 24.3. Sure. Which is pretty good when you consider they didn't have an offseason with him.
Well,
and that's another thing.
And it was all a conference schedule, too.
Yeah.
So you didn't have any lower level, you know what I mean, teams to kind of add those stats.
The boundary to that is you also didn't play a Power 5 team.
Also true.
But the thing is, no spring ball. For a while there, the MAC had canceled their season.
Right. Yeah. It was because it was very much in Big Ten country. So it's like they kind of follow what the Big Ten is doing, et cetera.
Right. So you didn't even get a chance to have the full Vince Karras effect last year. So I think that's going to help as well. So you give him 11 starters back, a full offseason. This is going to be a little bit of a salty defense. in the MAC. And then we'll get into kind of how they match up with Notre Dame. So it's a really interesting situation. Their D-line coach is Craig Kuligowski. Does that name ring a bell? He was the D-line coach at Miami for a long time that was just known as one of the best D-line coaches. He went to Alabama in 2018, and things kind of went a little weird for him, and now he's at Toledo. But he was known as a great D-line coach. He's a kind of a co-defensive coordinator. They have 3 co-coordinators. Well, they have Vince Karras, who's the D coordinator, and then they have 2 co-D coordinators, which is a little strange, but it worked for him last year.
Hey, whatever works for you.
So he's really put together a sleepy good, underrated coaching staff with some guys that have some big names and reputations, some Division III coaches that were known as great teachers. And I think that's important for a place like Toledo. Plus, tapping into the Heidelberg, the Mount Union type of thing. Those guys, what you have to understand is to be a great Division III program, you have to know every single high school program in your state. And so these guys are going to have great relationships with high school coaches in Michigan and Ohio and Indiana and Pennsylvania. So it's certainly going to help with recruiting. And Mount Union went down to Florida a lot and recruited players, a lot. Every time I'd send my coaches down to some high school in Florida or some recruiting fair in Florida, there'd be 5 Mount Union coaches down there, So the point being, so there's some recruiting advantages to hiring some of these guys that are from the Division III level, and it's paid off for them. And so I really like where this Toledo team is at. They're predicted to finish first and lose to Buffalo by Athlon, first in the West, and then lose to Buffalo in the MAC title game. But that was before. So Athlon still has Lance Leopold as Buffalo's head coach. And obviously Lance Leopold has since left to take over Kansas when Les Miles was fired.
That's right, yeah.
So, and then Lindy has them finishing second in the West. So I think this is a team that is definitely going to battle for the West crown. If I'm making predictions right now, I'd have to have Toledo winning the West because, number one, they barely lost to Ball State last year, and they just have a lot more coming back. But you look at a lot of these MAC teams, Vince, and it's really interesting. A lot of these teams have a bunch of dudes coming back. Of dudes coming back.
Well, like I said, that makes a lot of sense.
You mentioned. Exactly.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense to me. Exactly. I would totally do that, especially.
Oh, yeah.
Look, if I'm not going to the NFL, I'm going to put off adulthood for another year. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like,
oh, yeah.
Play some more football, some college football, man.
We talk about 20 starters coming back for Toledo. Ball State has 17. Buffalo has 12, which is one of the fewest. Then Miami of Ohio has 13. Central Michigan has 19. Western Michigan has 18.
Yeah.
Kent State has 17.
Yeah, I'm sensing a trend here.
Yeah. Eastern Michigan has 16, but 10 of them are on offense. Northern Illinois has 13. These teams have a lot of starters coming back. So it's going to be I'm looking forward to Maction this year. I really am. Again, Toledo should not compete with Notre Dame for 4 quarters. They just shouldn't. But we're just kind of giving an overview of who Toledo is right now. So that's why we're sounding, praiseworthy, because I think they're going to be a really good MAC team this year.
Yeah, right.
And I like that Jason Campbell has made some moves, and they're smart, savvy moves that allow them to really recruit to be in this, in this battle to get back to being the best team in the MAC, which you see some really ascending MAC. Ball State's under Mike New has ascended the last couple of years.
I love what Ball State's
Chuck Martin's doing a really nice job at Miami of Ohio right now. Western Michigan's winning again. Yeah. So you see some of these programs. Chris Creighton's Chris Creighton's getting Eastern Michigan back to where they're competing to get into bowl games.
Yep, absolutely.
And that was arguably the worst program in college football for years. So the MAC is really getting back to being what it was when I loved it back in the late 90s and early 2000s, which is just a really fun, well-coached, quality league where they're going to put some guys in the NFL, but occasionally they're going to beat a Power 5 team, but just a fun league to watch. I'm going to be watching a lot more MAC games this year than I did last year. That's for sure.
Well, the best part about MAC games is they're on like Wednesday and Thursday.
Tuesday, Wednesday.
It's those days where we're not usually watching football. And so, man.
And we've talked in the past. I hate that idea. For Notre Dame. It's a brilliant idea for the MAC. They have to do it.
On them. Yeah, absolutely.
They have to do it. There's no other way that they can get people to pay attention to them on a Saturday afternoon.
No way. Not if you're competing against the SEC and Notre Dame and the Big Ten. You name it, right? So, having those games during the week, it just makes so much sense. Mm-hmm. And obviously they avoid Sunday because nobody's playing college football on Sundays. Right. But yeah,
except Notre Dame.
Good point.
Before
the
NFL
starts,
right?
but
exactly.
Yes, you made your point, and I appreciate that. But yeah, Maction, man, you can't beat it.
Yeah, so it's going to be a fun year. So now we kind of look at Toledo and we look at them offensively. This is the area where Toledo had to get a lot better last year. But even then, it was a little interesting, Vince, because the 2 years prior, they had been really good at running the football, but they didn't score real well in 2019, even though they ran for over 200 yards a game. Last year, their scoring average jumped, but their offense went down quite a bit last season. So they were at 35 points per game, which was up from 27.3 from the year before, and down from which was down from 40.4 the year before that. Their rushing in the previous 2 years, so in 2017, when they were over 200 yards, 2018, they were 200 yards, 2019, they were over 200 yards. And then last year, they dropped down to 168.2. And again, I think a big part of that was just the lack of offseason, the lack of being able to develop some cohesion as a football team. But when you look at Toledo, to me, there's a couple things that stand out positively and negatively for the Rockets. Number one is you've got 9 starters coming back, which is a positive. You have all 5, I'm looking at here, all 5 of your starters along the offensive line are back, which is huge. And then you've obviously got Bryant Koback coming back. Bryant Koback is a running back that's already got over 2,600 career yards. Now, last year he was only at 500 because he only played 6 games. He was a 522. So that kind of tampered him down. He'd have been over, on that average, he'd have been over 1,000 yards in the regular season. He was a 522 in 6 games. So you extend that over the whole season, he's over 1,000 yards. Was over 1,000 yards the year before that, and then was at over 900 yards as a true freshman. So in 2018, he rushed for 917 yards and 14 touchdowns, 6.0 yards per carry. 2019, he was at 1,187 yards, 6.1 yards per carry, and 12 touchdowns. And then last year, again, in a strange year, he was down to 522 and 5.2 yards per carry. I expect Bryant Koback to his numbers to go back up over 1,000 yards, back up to 6 yards a carry. Good back. And when you look at what Bryant Koback is, he's a product of a good system. Okay. They are offensively a traditional spread offense. So they're going to be 3 receivers, 1 tight a lot of 11 personnel. They'll mix it up, go some 12, occasionally go 10, but I didn't see a lot of 11 personnel is what I saw, with some 12 personnel mixed in. A lot of read zones, a lot of RPOs. And they're sort of like that, not quite to the degree that Wake Forest is, but they're a traditional spread offense, which means long reads, really letting the defense commit, pulling and throwing a little hot pass behind it as part of the read, throwing a lot of bubble screens, taking some play action shots downfield. They'll move the pocket a lot if they don't feel they can protect the quarterback, which is called good coaching. But they're a team that's going to be built around the run game in the read zone. So schematically, a lot of inside zone, a lot of outside zone. But as a spread team, they're also going to do a lot of the spread run concepts, which aren't traditional gap schemes that you see in a more traditional offense. It's a lot like what you see at like Oklahoma, who's air raid, but similar concepts, which is those those quick wrap plays, bringing a backside guard, just having him quickly kick out. Having him wrap around, where you then base block the end and he just wraps around and pulls and you're just reading. So you're occupying the front side lineman and the front side linebacker with your puller, and then you're occupying the backside linebacker with your read. So if the backside linebacker flows over, you just pull and throw an RPO behind it, or you pull it and run. So it's going to require you to be disciplined on defense. And you're going to have to make sound decisions. Yeah, exactly, Vince. And that's the key is if you're too aggressive, they're just going to pull it and throw it over your head. If you're too passive, then they'll just run it down run it at you all day. So again, it's going to be a good test for Notre Dame. This is the thing. This is a line with good size for the MAC. They've got a running back with skill. He's a slasher. He's a one cut and go guy. Can really get after it. Bryant Koback we're referring to.
Yeah, he's an all-MAC
run
player.
Game wise, game wise, they're gonna. It's gonna be a good test for Notre Dame because you have to be disciplined. You have to be assignment conscious. It'll be a test for how well Notre Dame has picked up the scheme for Marcus Freeman from an execution standpoint, right? So Notre Dame should win the individual matchups all day. But schematically, can you be assignment sound? Can you be assignment correct? And those type of things, that's going to be the question. that we're going to find out against Toledo. And Toledo puts you in those positions where you have to be assignment correct, or they're going to rip off a couple big plays.
And that's what good offenses do, right? I mean, and because they know going into this game that they can't match up man to man. I mean, what I mean, like position to position, not man to man as in coverage. I'm talking about, our end versus their, tackle, et cetera, et cetera. So they have to scheme it, and they do a good job of scheming it. Now, one way Notre Dame can kind of disrupt that scheme, in my opinion, is with their defensive line, because that's going to be a huge mismatch. And I know we're going to talk about, matchups and things like that, but it's going to be a little bit like a broken record for me when I talk about a mismatch with Notre Dame defensive line versus the other team's offensive line. But it's a big chasm here. And when you can dominate the offensive line, you can mess up a lot of what an offense wants to do, right? Now, you can't overdo it. You can't, like Brian was saying, you can't be overly aggressive, but you can, when a guard is pulling, for example, if you're quick enough to get in there and disrupt that,
right,
then you can make things happen.
Right.
You know what I mean?
It's you reading your key, and once you see that guy wrap, you fly downhill and meet him at the point of attack and clog up that run lane.
And that's where I think
force that bounce.
And that's where I think Notre Dame can be very, very successful defensively against a team like Toledo. And again, if you're not reading your keys correctly and you're just trying to solo and you're trying to do your own thing, that's when you can get in trouble.
Right.
And that could happen. But overall, I just feel like that's the biggest mismatch in this particular matchup.
My concern from a Toledo standpoint is I thought they had a good quarterback in Eli Peters. I thought he was a good player. He got banged up a little bit last year. Had some talent, just could never really stay healthy, to be honest with you. And he's not back. So, but they had a quarterback that will be back named Carter Bradley. He's a rising junior. Had some nice moments last year. He started the final 2 games of the year when Bradley got hurt. Threw for 432 yards and 3 touchdowns against Northern Illinois. Threw for 265 yards and 3 touchdowns against Central Michigan. The problem is he threw 5 picks in those 2 starts as well.
Right, exactly.
But those struggles that came from experience, and that experience is going to help him coming to this season. But where they lack, to me, the issue for them in a matchup against Notre Dame specifically is I don't see the perimeter weapons that are going to really give Notre Dame problems.
Yeah, absolutely. They've got a kid coming in, Matt Landers from Georgia, who gives them
tall
kind
kid,
of a legitimate threat outside, right? A big tall kid. You can throw those back shoulders and things like that. He could be a matchup issue,
height, size wise,
based on size, etc. But they're going to have to fit some tight windows, to get him the ball against this Notre Dame secondary, in my opinion. But he's a guy that can, obviously, he was at Georgia and he played and he scored. And so he's a guy that brings, potentially that veteran leadership, from a transfer situation. So he's a guy that I don't want to use the word he scares me, but he's a legitimate wide receiver.
For that level, he is.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, I mean, there's a reason he didn't play much in Georgia and he transferred to the MAC, but he's a good player.
Right.
And the 2 kids that they did have last year, I mean, again, numbers-wise, they put up good numbers. Isaiah Winstead had 25 catches in 6 games, averaged 17.2 yards per catch. Bryce Mitchell was their number 2 leading receiver from a yard standpoint. He had 13 catches for 306 yards. So and Mitchell's an interesting guy too, because he's got some size as well. The number 3 receiver, Denzel McKinney-Lewis, last year. Again, all these guys are back. Had 20 catches for 289 yards. That's 14.5 yards per catch. So you've got 3 guys that all average minimum 14.5 yards per catch. 1 guy's over 20. So that comes from the offense we talk about. A lot of RPOs, a lot of shots down the field. They will get guys in space. They'll run crossers and try to get them in space to let them run. But it comes from a lot of shots down the field. That's going to be where a lot of this comes from. So, but they're just not the kind of receivers that should beat Notre Dame. If they're beating the Notre Dame secondary, that's going to be a problem. Having said that, they are good enough, however, and they threaten you schematically in a way that, again, it's a good test for Notre Dame. It is discipline-wise, technique-wise. Can you read your keys and get depth and all those type of things? And I think size-wise, too, is where you talked about Landers being 6'5", Denzel McKinley-Lewis is 5'11". The other receivers they have are 6'3" and 6'3". Mitchell and Winstead are both 6'3". So you have 3 receivers that are going to be part of your rotation that are going to be at least 6'3".
Right. Yep.
So they're going to give you some size, and why that matters is because when you have size, it puts more emphasis on your technique. your technique has to be sound. You have to be in phase with the receiver to be able to play the ball. Speed-wise, again, I don't see them being guys that should be running by the Notre Dame corners. If they do, that's going to be a problem. That's going to be a bad sign for moving forward. But just again, this is a good Toledo team. I like this team. Again, you have 5 starters coming back on the offensive line. Brian Koback is going to be over 3,000 yards for his career, like early in the year. Hopefully it's not against Notre Dame because he needs 300 yards in the first 2 games. So unless he just blows up against Norfolk State, which is possible.
Absolutely possible. Yeah.
I don't see it coming against Notre Dame, or I hope it doesn't come against Notre Dame. But this is going to be a good test for the Notre Dame defense. And really the second that both of these games we're going to talk about are going to be really good tests. Not tests to where Notre Dame should lose.
Right.
Not tests where they're going to get beat up, because this team is so physical or good, but just good tests where you better be on your game or they're going to make some big plays and make the game a little bit more competitive than it should be.
Yeah.
And so that when you talk about a MAC team, that's where it is, right? It's the only way that they're going to be able to hang with you and beat you is if they can score. That's going to be the big key. Right. Before we move on, Vince, I just want to thank Mike Huff real quick. Mike, appreciate you very, very much for the super chat. Very, very much. And Mike had said earlier in the show, Vince, that Toledo's not going to be a pushover, and he's correct. This is a game Notre Dame should win.
Sure, but they're
should win convincingly.
Solid MAC team.
Yes, you're going to learn a lot about this yourself in this game. You know. And so that's where they're at. But defensively, that's where it's going to get interesting, Vince. That's the matchup where I think they're coached well. They're a 4-2-5 team. Vince Karras is a very good football coach. They made a huge improvement from where they were 2 years before, where they were giving up over 30 points a game, dropping down to 24 points a game. And as you said, you only played MAC teams. It kind of balances it, but there's no, like they play their non-conference, Colorado State, they play UMass. They'll play some teams like that they should score some points on. You didn't have that last year, but you also didn't have the Miami, Florida that hung 50-something on them a couple years ago either. So it kind of balances it out. But, giving up 24 points a game playing in the MAC is pretty good. That's good football. So they definitely got better last year. They were 3rd in the MAC in points per game. So big jump from where they were the year before when they ranked 10th in the league in scoring, and then up 8th in 2018. Even though last year they won 11 games, they were only 6th in the MAC in scoring defense. The highest they've been prior to last year when they were 3rd was 4th, and that was in Jason Candle's first year. So that's a good first step for Coach Karras, again, with no offseason, with no normal to install weird rules about, how many kids can be in a room at a time and masks and all this other kind of stuff. You still have that kind of jump, shows that he's a good football coach.
And he's got all those guys returning. I think that's a big key here, because when you're starting off and you're new as a defensive coordinator, et cetera, first of all, he started off in a year that was, like you said, just crazy.
Not the year you want to be a first-year coach.
Exactly. And it's like we talked about with Mike Norvell down in Florida State. It's not a great year to start something, right? And when you're a coordinator, you're starting something on your side of the ball. I mean, you're the head coach of that side of the ball, right? And so coming in during a COVID year is very, very difficult. And so the absolute best thing, we saw that jump from 19 to 20. Well, you got all those guys back. So you're going to assume there's going to be a bit of a jump this year if things go according to their plans, right? I mean, and so you're working with the same set of guys. Now, it'd be one thing if, for example, Louisville from a few years ago when they had all those defensive guys returning, it was like, well, they weren't very good. So do you really want them back, right?
Right.
But this group made that big significant jump from 19 to 20. Well, now they're back for 21. So, you see what I'm saying? Am I articulating this correctly?
Yeah, no. I mean, this is again, looking at them, we're talking right now not about the matchup against Notre Dame specifically.
Correct. We're just talking about Toledo
as a defense heading into the whole season. I think that they're going to have a chance to become one of the better defenses in the MAC this year. I mean, they've got good players for that level, some good players for that level. And the things that are going to hurt them against Notre Dame, which we'll get into, should not hurt them as much playing against the rest of the teams in the league.
Right.
That experience is important. They were very fundamentally sound. They're not a super aggressive defense. They had 12 sacks last year in in 6 games. He had 37 tackles for loss. I mean, that's the disruptiveness from a standpoint of tackles for loss was pretty good. But if you look at it, 4 of their top 5 guys were defensive linemen. They had a guy, Deshaun Johnson, who's going to be back this year, defensive lineman, who had 8 tackles for loss in 6 games. That's pretty good. But what I like about it is they're not doing it from just a bunch of exotic, let's bring pressure from everywhere kind of standpoint. It's let's attack with our front and let's fit behind it. And it's about being sound and a sound in an aggressive standpoint. And that's good coaching, and I like what they did last year. I mean, as I'm watching film, I'm like, yeah, this is a really well-coached football team. They don't have great talent. It's going to be better this year because a lot of guys are more experienced. Not great talent from a standpoint of competing against Notre Dame, but one of the more talented teams in the MAC for sure. But really well coached, Vince. That's the thing that I took away from this football team is this is a really sound, well coached football team.
Well, and early on in the season, this is game 2 for Notre Dame, right? And if I'm previewing tomorrow, which I don't think is a huge thing to give away, the offensive line is going to be one of our question marks, right? And so this is a group that can test this offensive line to a degree from a schematic standpoint.
There you go.
Because we've talked about it in the past, right? We've talked about the fact that when Harry Hiestand was the offensive line coach at Notre Dame, nothing they saw in a game surprised them. They were prepared for anything that an opposing team could bring them. But that hasn't necessarily been the case the last few years.
Yeah.
Okay. And so that's what I'm getting at. And so
2 of the last 3 years. Yeah.
And so you've got a bunch of new guys, right? And now we've established the fact that there starts with these guys, but they're starting at different positions potentially. Yeah. There's going to be some time that they're going to have to gel. And so if Toledo comes out and I'm not saying bring all kinds of exotic stuff, but I'm saying bring some stuff towards this offensive line. Yeah. That's an area where they could be somewhat successful.
You're going to have to.
They've got a couple of dudes on that defensive line that can play ball. I mean, the Hines kid, the Johnson kid, they together they combined for over 200 tackles, almost 40 tackles for loss, and 5 sacks. Like, that's doing some work
again in 6 games. Just Correct. So people remember, that's
right.
The 5 sacks. That's 6 games. That's not
exactly. Right. So they can cause some trouble, is what I'm saying. Now, for a full game, maybe not, but they can cause this offensive line some trouble in game 2 of the season.
We saw that against Ball State a couple years ago, back in 2018.
Yes.
Because Ball State. See, here's the thing: everything we said about Toledo and what they do in the MAC, they can't be that way against Notre Dame.
Right.
They can't, because the problem is you talked about good their defensive line is. Here's the problem, though. Their 2 ends are 235 and 250.
Right.
Their defensive tackles are 280 and 255. That's it.
Right.
That if they just try to play, just shoot gaps and be they're going to get blown off the ball. They're going to have to do twists and stunts and slants and things like that, movement games, and that's exactly what Ball State did to Notre Dame 2 years ago. And the offensive line got embarrassed in that game.
Yes, they did.
And just giving up pressures. I mean, they were giving up free runs on it. Brandon Wimbush that game because they were woefully unprepared for those line games. And I remember talking to a couple sources after that game, and they were like, "Yeah, they were doing stuff we'd never seen before." And the thing that surprised me was, I'd seen that before. I watched their film.
Right.
The other thing was you have to be smart enough as an offensive line coach to know that this team is not just going to come play you straight up and play you the same way they play all the other MAC teams. Right? You have to assume their coaches are not idiots.
100%.
And that's been an issue. Now, last year with Chris Watt and Jeff Quinn working together, that wasn't an issue. Notre Dame was far more prepared. This is where we're going to find out. The first few weeks we're going to find out.
Yep.
Because, Florida State's not a real exotic team, but they have some talent up front.
Mm-hmm.
Purdue is, we'll have to see what they do because they have a first-year defensive coordinator. We'll get into him here in a little bit. But Toledo's going to be athletic for up front, and they're going to throw a lot of stuff at them. So if Notre Dame can pick up those line games and just blow Toledo off the ball, that's going to be a great sign because you are way more talented than Toledo. But can you be assignment correct? Can you show you're going to have to be cohesive? The communication is going to have to be there to eliminate a lot of the big. Again, you're going to run for yards on them. You're going to beat them. You're going to score 35 to 45, 50 points on them, right? I mean, that's going to happen, but you can also do that and still
not look great up front.
Yeah,
man.
and be concerning. It's kind of like, you remember when Notre Dame played Nevada? Was it 2008 or 2009? And Notre Dame shut them out. And I remember after that game, I was telling people, like, this is not good performance by the defense. And they're like, you're such a hater. They shut them out. And I'm like, yeah, but they had 10 drops that game. You remember that? Nevada dropped like 10 passes, like 10 of Colin Kaepernick's passes. And there were guys getting open, and he wasn't finding them, or they were dropping balls. And it was like, a good team is going to score. And then like a week later or 2 weeks later, Tate Forcier looks like a Heisman Trophy winner against that defense. Just because you win and score points doesn't mean someone who, another team's not going to look at what you do and say, hey, there's some stuff we can expose there. It's kind of like when Brian Van Gorder's first year in 2014, Notre Dame's defense played great early in the year, shut out Michigan, 37-0. That should have counted. By the way, that should not have been waved off. That should not have been a penalty on Max Redfield. So beat Michigan 37-0 and held Stanford to 14 points. But the whole time, you and I were talking that year, and like, there's some stuff going on there that I'm curious how some of these other teams are going to, once they get film on them. And then, of course, as they finally got film on them, they absolutely shredded that Notre Dame defense in the second half of the year. I mean, I remember that year, like, was it Northwestern hadn't scored 30 points in a game all year. We'll go find that. Their offense that year, this is what, they 24, 15, 24, 29, 20, 17, 17, 7, 9. That's what they had done coming into the Notre Dame game. And they scored 43 against Notre Dame. Now, in overtime, but like Notre Dame was up by 11 in the fourth quarter and let them go. I mean, that's just kind of, you saw it. You could see the problems. You could see the flaws in that team. They hadn't had more than 394 yards all year on offense that year. That was against Northern Illinois. They went for 547 against Notre Dame, right? I mean, so you could see some of those problems. And so we could see some of those things again in the offensive line. If we don't see those things and they play sound, fun, they're picking up the stunts and they're getting movement, all that, that's going to be a great sign for Notre Dame.
Absolutely.
So we're talking about, like, yes, they're going to, the end result is going to be a win. It's going to probably be a convincing win, but those are the things you want to look for. Do they allow too many run throughs? Do they allow too much pressure on Jack Cohn? Are they picking up the twists and stunts? Are they getting movement? Are they coming off the ball with physicality and getting a push?
Are they reestablishing the line of scrimmage the way they want to establish the line of scrimmage?
As opposed to just catching.
Right.
If you're seeing those things against Toledo, that's going to be a good sign for moving forward, right? And so it's looking at the level of execution as opposed to the end result.
Yes.
And that's why I've always said, as a coach, you have to be more process-driven than results-driven. Because you can get a win, but there's going to be things you're like, boy, if we play like this against Cincinnati, Wisconsin, whoever else, we're going to be in trouble. And so, yes, we got a win, but we need to look at what the process was like. What was our work like going into that week? Hey, we gave up a lot of run throughs on tackle and twists, right? So, okay, what did we do in practice to prepare for that? And then how do we make corrections to make those adjustments and pick those things up Monday to Friday next week against Purdue? And those are the things that we're going to learn a lot about this Notre Dame offense.
Yes, we
are. In my opinion, in the especially the offensive line, really in the second game matchup.
And to be honest with you, that's where my focus is going to be in the first home game of the season for Notre Dame. I'm going to be focused on the offensive line and what is going to be happening there. Because look, Notre Dame can big play Toledo all day long. Like you said, they could put up points. I'm not necessarily worried about that, but it's the little things and watching this offensive line against this defensive line, against the twists and the stunts, like you said, that's where my focus is going to be. And I would suggest, if you can, watching it on TV, everybody out there, that's where your focus should be. And you'll be able to see when the game is over, when, we're telling you what we saw and, our first reaction to it, you'll understand where we're coming from, whether it's a praising situation or whether it's worried about next week kind of a situation, right? So focus on that. If you're one of those fans that wants to try to focus on the little things, I would focus on the line in this game for sure.
Yes. Yeah. And obviously, we'll have an idea. We'll be looking at scheme. Did they run RPOs and all that? But as far as Notre Dame's overall success, it's going to be determined by how well the offensive line plays.
Yep.
And that's going to be the key for me when we talk about Toledo. But at the end of the day, Vince, this is, as we kind of get into prediction time, this should be a game that's a convincing win for Notre Dame. Right. I would not be surprised if Toledo, because again, this is going to be on a short week. because Notre Dame plays on a Sunday
to Saturday.
Right.
Yeah, that's right.
It's going to be a short week.
Right.
So that's going to kind of push the preparation, the rest time back a little bit. So I could see Notre Dame maybe not being super crisp early, but by the time we get into the second quarter and then the second half, it's a game where Notre Dame's talent and size and experience should start winning the day.
And
but
conditioning, for that matter.
Yeah, I could see Notre Dame coming out and maybe pressing a little bit early because of the excitement from the home crowd and all those type of things. So I could see that, but I'm okay. I can live with that. I'm okay with that. It just as long as we're good now. Let's let's roll and then let's cruise because this needs to be one of those games that you're able to get. By the time you get to the fourth quarter, you need to get Tyler Buckner and Drew Pine some work. You need to make sure that Lorenzo Styles and Deion Colzier are getting some work. Get some of those young linemen like Chris Stoffick and Quinn Carroll and Tosh Baker. This needs to be a game where they get at least a full quarter under their belt, if not more. And so the sooner you figure it out, the sooner you get rolling, the better. Now, of course, if they come out and just blast them, that's great. That would be the ideal situation. But
great.
I just want to make sure that we understand game 2, very experienced football team,
first
really
game at
well coached
home,
football team, first game at home.
Yeah,
they could come out and not be super sharp. And Toledo's going to come out they're going to come out fired up. And again, the fact that this is a well coached football team. So they're going to have some stuff that Notre Dame's have to figure out early on both sides of the ball. And, could make it a somewhat competitive game for a quarter, but they have to pull away after that.
So do we I don't necessarily have a score prediction for this game. It's more for me. It feels like a 4-touchdown game to me.
Just kind of what my concern with these things are, Vince, because we haven't even gotten into fall camp yet.
Right.
It's just more of looking at how this game should be played out based on what we know of these football teams so far.
Fair enough.
So that's why I say this is a game where I could see it being a little closer early, but a game that Notre Dame needs to really put on. Kind of bury him a little bit in the second quarter, come out in the third quarter, just put the game away and say, hey, look, midway through the third quarter, let's start working in some guys.
Yes.
Maybe you don't make mass substitutions right away, but, maybe you get Tosh Baker in for a series at right tackle with the first team offensive line. Maybe you get, Rocco Spindler and Tosh Baker. I mean, if they came out on a middle of third quarter, they still had a starting quarterback in the game, or maybe if they took out Jack Cohn but put in Drew Pine, but kept Jarrett Patterson, kept Zeke Correll, kept Tosh, Blake Fisher, but then pulled Lug and Madden just to get those two young guys some work on the right side, and then put in Drew Pine or Tyler Buckner quarterback. Okay, cool.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, cool.
I don't want the entire second team coming in all at once. Specifically at the quarterback position.
Usually because it's late in the game. That's the problem. It's when they make the mass substitution, it's like they're just going to do it and just hand the ball off.
I want Notre Dame to take advantage of, getting either Drew Pine or Tyler Buckner, whoever number 2 is, right? I want them to get time with the first team. And I want it to be, a legitimate drive now where they're just handing off. You know what I mean? They have to take advantage of those opportunities. And I think this could be one of them. You don't go through your week of practice like they did for Ball State, assuming that that's going to be the case, but it still should be the case if they practice the way they're supposed to practice.
So just so people who may not know that story, Vince,
thank you.
You want to go ahead and share that one?
Well, it from what we were told
by a lot of different sources,
they were practicing the backups more than they were the starters throughout the week, assuming that they were going to get a lot of time because it was going to be a blowout, etc. And then the starters struggled. And those second guys really didn't get in the game. And
they won 24-16.
Yeah, they never got in. So you cannot practice and anticipate that kind of a game. I mean, there's ways to do it, and they didn't do it right.
You can do it, but yeah. So normally, you'll go 70-30 or 60-40 ones and twos. What you can do is bring some kids up, get them work with the twos that you normally wouldn't get them. But they were doing that, putting those guys in with the ones.
Yeah.
Or the first team offense was the 2, and then the second team offense was the 3s.
Right.
And it just was I remember being told that before the game.
Yeah.
This was the weirdest week of practice.
Right.
And of course, then the offense, and again, it was so early in the year. It was your team is not ready yet. You're replacing Quentin Nelson and Mike McGlinchey and, all these starters. And you think by game 2, you're going to have this figured out. It was not a smart move.
It was not good. And
I don't
hopefully they learn.
Brian Kelly. I would imagine they have.
Yes. Yeah.
And they've been pretty good since then. I would imagine that they've.
I agree.
And if you look at what they did to New Mexico and Bowling Green the next year,
fair enough.
I got a feeling that they learned that lesson because they blasted those.
And that's what should happen here by the time the final gun sounds.
However, Toledo does not have Brian Van Gorder running their defense like Bowling Green did. I couldn't help it.
I know you couldn't. It's great. That's why I love you. That's fantastic.
So Toledo, Notre Dame, September 11th. That's going to be another part of it. It's going to be a really interesting day.
Right. Forgot about that.
It just adds to that opening day. It's not only that, Vince, but it's going to be the 20-year anniversary of September 11th, and which was my first year coaching. A day that I certainly will never forget. And I know that as a nation, we've largely forgotten about it, but I haven't. And so that's going to be another interesting aspect to that day. Is just it won't affect the game at all for the players. I mean, most of these kids weren't alive. A lot of these kids weren't alive, and a lot of them were babies when it happened.
Right.
Like Kane Madden, who's like the oldest player on Notre Dame's football team. He was what, 4?
Right.
So it's not going to impact the game, but just for me as a grown up who experienced it as an adult. That's going to add a little bit to that day, just because again, 20-year anniversary. And so,
I can't believe that.
Yeah. So it's opening day for Notre Dame and Toledo. And it's going to be a good test for Notre Dame.
I agree.
And again, not good test. And it's going to be a 7-point game, but a good test in that we're going to learn a lot about this football team. It's going to be a good building block for them to go into after that. I mean, it's Power 5 games for the next 2 months, right? They don't get another non-Power 5 team until Navy in November.
That's true.
So it's you're getting ready to jump into the meat of your Power 5 stuff. Of course, Notre Dame plays 10 Power 5 teams this year, correct?
Yeah, if you don't consider Cincinnati, you consider Cincinnati a Power 5?
No, they're not. So they play 9 Power 5 teams plus a preseason group of 16 that's ranked in the top 10.
Right.
So I look at Cincinnati like a Power 5. But they're
agreed.
Not. But technically, they're not.
That's why I asked. I was like,
no, it's good because I'm thinking like, okay, Cincinnati, Wisconsin, Power 5. Oh, yep, okay, nope. But the meat of their schedule is coming up,
right?
And
it's that 5-game stretch that is that we'll get to, but yeah. So let's jump into Purdue, Brian. That would be game 3 on Notre Dame's schedule.
September 18th.
Yes, and it is a home game, of course. And they welcome the Boilermakers. What has the layoff been between Notre Dame and Purdue? It's been a little bit since
2014, yeah.
Was it 14? Wow.
Yeah, they played in the Shamrock game in Indianapolis, which was the dumbest placement of a Shamrock game ever. 2 Indiana teams playing in Indianapolis.
I remember that. I went to that game. Yeah, I remember that. Yeah. I remember that one. That was dumb. And if I remember,
that's a series I miss. To be honest,
absolutely. Because there's a ton of Purdue fans around here, and I love
in-state.
Absolutely,
there's a long history between the two teams.
And I'll be honest with you, I miss Michigan State too. I would love to have Michigan State and Purdue, back on the schedule. Maybe trade them off a little bit. But I really enjoyed Michigan State and Purdue being on the schedule. I really did, and it hits home for me. I've got relatives that went to Michigan State. I've got relatives that went to Purdue. But I just enjoy those particular intersectional rivalries, right? And so, I'm glad Purdue's back.
Here's some numbers for you.
Thanks.
Notre Dame and Purdue have played each other 84 times.
There you go.
Notre Dame holds a 56-26-2 advantage. Notre Dame and Michigan State have played each other 77 times. And so a little bit of a difference there. And then, of course, Notre Dame and Michigan have played each other 43 times. I was
going to say it's about twice as much.
Way less.
Yeah.
Than they've played those other teams.
But that's the rivalry. Yeah.
A rivalry that means nothing to me. So exactly. This even more than Michigan State, because like Michigan State has a little bit of the, hey, look, they were good to Notre Dame when the rest of the Big Ten was doing their anti-Catholic, don't want to play Notre Dame hater thing. Michigan State was trying to push to get Notre Dame into the Big Ten. That was the one of the few Big Ten teams that really was making that push to bring Notre Dame in. And, so I like that. But the Purdue rivalry one to me makes sense. It's anytime you can have a rivalry game that's a bus ride, not a flight.
Right.
I like that.
Yeah.
And it's a bus ride. And it's an in-state school great tradition. This is one I wish was back on the schedule.
Me too.
To be honest with you.
Me too.
It's the only Big Ten team I really care about playing all the time. I would love to see, honestly, for me, I would love to see Stanford get removed from the schedule and for Purdue to replace them as the permanent third.
I would love that.
Rival.
Yeah, I would love that. I would love that. Yeah, I would. And it's, when we're talking about this particular Purdue team, look, it's not necessarily going to feel like a rivalry game necessarily.
I'm not sure about that.
Higher on Purdue than I am.
I am.
Be honest with you.
So let's just dive into Purdue, right?
All right, let's do it.
This is a huge year for Purdue. Huge year for Purdue. And even more so, huge year for Jeff Brom. Came in, this is now his 5th season, inherited a terrible program.
Agreed.
To me, the worst Power 5 program in America. Worse than Rutgers, worse than Kansas at the time. Woo. It was bad. Coach Hazel did a really bad job. The team stunk. His recruiting was bad. He inherited a terrible roster. And Jeff Brom came in.
He falls under that category of guys that I liked as a human, but not necessarily as a coach.
Some guys are just better. Look, some guys are just meant to be assistants.
Yeah,
that's
for
just,
sure.
Or be head coaches at a place like Kent State, where he had some success.
Yeah. Yep.
And obviously was a very good long-time assistant coach at Ohio State. Yes, really good guy.
Yeah.
Bad head football coach.
I had a lot of interaction with him. I thought he was a great guy. I would listen to him talk. I was like, okay. But it just didn't translate. It just didn't translate on the recruiting trail.
Terrible recruiting, which was surprising because he was a good recruit, known as a good recruiter at Ohio State. But again, it just shows that it's a lot easier to recruit at Ohio State than it is to recruit at Purdue.
What depends on what you've got on your shirt, man. When you walk in the building, it makes a big difference. It just does.
So he inherits that situation where I think Purdue had won like 4 games in the previous 3 years, something absurd like that. Hadn't won. I'm trying to remember what. I'm going to pull it up here real quick. What Darrell Hazel had done. I mean, it was bad, and what Jeff Brom walked into. And so I'm pulling it up now. Purdue in 4 years under Darrell Hazel won a grand total of 9 games. They went 1-11, 3-9, 2-10. I'm sorry. Hold on. Did they win another game that year? No, they didn't. When he got fired, they lost the 6 games after he got fired in his 4th year. They won 3 games. They went 3-21 in the Big Ten. So that's what Jeff Brom walked into. And
look, Purdue is not a perennial top of the Big Ten team necessarily, but they're better than that.
They're way better than that.
You know what I mean? Yeah. They should be middle to upper third, in my opinion. With
entrenched in the middle with an occasional upper third finish, right?
Absolutely, they should not be bottom feeders in the Big Ten. Right. They just should not be with their tradition.
So then you look at what he did in his first 2 years. Again, you inherit a program that won 9 games in 3 years. In 4 years, they go 7-6 in year 1, win 4 games in the Big Ten. So again, 9 wins in 4 seasons total. In Jeff Brom's first 2 years of Purdue, they won 9 Big Ten games compared to 3 the previous 4 years. And that included in year 2 a beatdown of Ohio State, which knocked Ohio State out of the college football playoff.
That was beautiful.
Yeah. And so they're trending up. They go into 2019. They got almost everybody coming back except their quarterback, and the wheels fall off. One of the most injury ravaged teams I've ever seen. They lost everybody. By the end of the year, their starting quarterback, their leading rusher, their leading receiver, and their best defensive player were all true freshmen. They were just ravaged by injuries.
Yeah, brutal.
And they go 4-8. And then last year they come out and they go 2-4. And their 2-4 includes they start off 2-0. Then they lose by a touchdown to Northwestern, who won the West. They lose by 3 points to Minnesota in a game they got absolutely screwed. Do you remember that play where they called offensive pass interference on a late touchdown, which was just one of the worst calls I've ever seen in my life?
I do.
Then they lost by a touchdown to Rutgers in a game where they blew a lead, and then they lost by 10 to Nebraska. Those last 2 games against Rutgers and Nebraska were home games. Inexcusable to lose at home to them. And
those
of course,
2 teams, yes.
You're right. Rondell Moore has a monster freshman year, never healthy again.
Right.
And that was another thing, is just injuries just continue to ravage that team, which again, you're responsible for that. I mean, at some point in time, when you have back-to-back years of a lot of injuries, you have to look at your decisions as a coach on your strength program.
Yeah.
Yep. And 1 year I can understand. 2 years, it's a bad sign. But he recruited well. This Purdue team's going to be a lot more talented than your typical, 6-12 team the previous 2 years. Look, I'm going to do a later next week. I'm going to have like an all opponent offense and defensive team. Purdue's going to have several guys on those. They're going to have They're going to have a receiver on there. They're going to have a defensive lineman on there. They're going to have a couple other guys on sort of the second team. This is a team that has more talent than you might expect when you look at their record, and that's why I say they could be better. But Jeff Brom has to prove it now, right? I mean, it's now show me.
And that's
time
why it's a big
him.
year. That's why it's a big year for him, because he's been able to entrench himself. He's getting his recruits on the field. This is a big year for him. And again, I don't put a whole lot of stock in what happened last year to a lot of teams, for a lot of teams.
Right.
Because especially with a couple
of
the teams,
those Big Ten MAC teams that canceled and then came back.
You nailed it, because they only had half of a season. They didn't have much prep, all of that, and so much uncertainty.
Vince, what does it do to you mentally when you've okay, season's over, we're not going to play,
right?
And then just all of a sudden, oh, by the way, we're going to play. Like
tomorrow, you need.
How
to
do you just turn that switch back on?
Right.
Well, here's the crazy thing: they were practicing that entire freaking time. They were working out as a team the entire time that they couldn't practice and play, but they could work out. There's just so many stupid things.
So dumb.
But you look at them, Vince, and you say they got to go to a bowl game this year. I mean, they have to at least go 6-6. I honestly think they need to be better than 6-6. And they've got a schedule this year that sets up favorably for it. I'm looking at it now. I got my Lindy's in front of me.
I'm looking at it.
You got a home game against Oregon State. You're at home. You got to win that game. And this is a game they've been losing recently. They play at UConn, who would you say they're a bottom 5 college football program right now, Vince?
Yes, absolutely.
I don't care where you're playing that game.
They haven't rebounded from the Bob Diaco.
No, they have not.
I mean, just being honest, they haven't.
Pretty bad. Then they're at Notre Dame. Right, it should be a loss. But then, you're home against Illinois, home against Minnesota, winnable games, at Iowa, home against Wisconsin, at Nebraska, home against Michigan State, at Ohio State, at Northwestern, and home against Indiana. I mean, honestly, if Purdue's the team that they should be based on their talent level, the only games on there that I say, no, they got no shot, should be at Notre Dame and at Ohio State.
Wisconsin?
No, it's at home.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
okay.
I mean, I don't think the talent gap between Ohio State and Purdue, Wisconsin and Purdue is enormous to where you shouldn't be able to at least be in that game at home. And then if a couple things go your way, you should, maybe pull off that upset. I mean, that's the thing is, if you're an NFL scout and you're looking at Purdue and Wisconsin and you're going to draft only guys from your first 2 picks are coming from Purdue.
As opposed to Wisconsin, yeah.
Right.
Wisconsin's more known, I guess, I would say, as like a team.
Right.
You know what I mean?
But that's the thing, though, is if you're Purdue, you're at home, this is a game you need to be in. And that's my point. And if you can't at least be competitive at home against Wisconsin in year 5,
then there's bigger issues. Yeah.
There's bigger issues.
You're absolutely correct.
Michigan State's not that good. But again, all those teams I'm talking about, like at Northwestern, that's going to be a tough game. But I don't think Northwestern will be very good this year. Pat Fitzgerald has never done well in years where he loses a lot of experience, and they lose I think they got like 9 starters coming back. Northwestern.
Well, that's at a neutral field too. I think they're playing at Soldier Field. In that one. So
are they really? Okay.
So
that's even worse for Northwestern.
It just says Chicago. Yeah. So I'm assuming
that's even worse for Northwestern.
It's a neutral.
It's not even on their home field.
Right.
So Vince, even at Iowa, I that's going to be a tough game. But is Iowa really that good? So to me, there's like 3 I definitely chalk up as losses: at Iowa, at Notre Dame, at Ohio State. Illinois and Minnesota at home, Wisconsin at home, Michigan State at home, Indiana at home. All should be winnable games in year 5 of a good coach's program.
Yeah.
At Northwestern's winnable. At Nebraska, I think it's going to be tougher than people think. I'm a little higher on Nebraska this year than a lot of people are, but still a winnable game. And then you're at UConn and you're home against Oregon State. There has to be 6 wins in there.
Yeah,
has to be.
And that's the thing. It's like they could be anywhere from 6 wins to 8, 9 wins, depending on how things shake out with the way I'm looking at this schedule. Because the Big Ten teams they're playing aren't world beaters, or they're down right now, or I think they catch some of these, like Michigan State, for example. They're going to catch Michigan State as they're trying to build it back up. Now, I think the arrow is pointing in the right direction for Michigan State, but they're not there yet, right? And so this is a great year to pick them off, So yeah, I agree with you. I think that the best part about this is, and I'm speaking from a college football fan standpoint, that Purdue Indiana game at the end of the season could actually mean something.
Yeah.
I really do. I think that game could really mean something. I'm not talking like the winner gets to go to a bowl. You know what I mean? Like in the past, like that game could potentially mean something. I think both of those teams could be pretty decent.
Right.
You know what I mean? So that excites me. Like I said, as a guy who lives in Indiana, as a college football fan, that gets me a little excited. So
now what Purdue, let's dive into Purdue a little bit offensively, Vince. And this is going to be the side of the ball that has to carry them. So there's two different approaches to their offense and the defense. And we'll start with the offense first. This has to be their strength. It has to be. I mean, Jeff Brom is a guy that's known as one of the best offensive minds of college football. And you can ask any college football coach that has any familiarity with him, and they're going to tell him this guy is really, really smart. But the offense hasn't played at an elite level the last few years. And the big reason why is injuries have been a big part of it, but quarterback play. Quarterback play has been a big issue for them in recent years. And right now that's going to continue to be an issue for them. It is, they've got to figure some things out.
Is it a QB battle between these two? I see they're not returning starters, but they both have similar.
They say no returning starter, but Jack Plummer started the final 3 games, and I thought he played well. I mean, he got 3 starts. He threw for 367. I mean, look. The last 3 games, they scored 31, 30, and 27 points, which isn't world beating, but it's good. He completed 83% of his passes in his first start against Minnesota, threw for 367 yards, 3 touchdowns. Next week against Rutgers was okay. I remember that game. He had some misses, but he went 20 of 35, 237 yards, 2 touchdowns, and a pick. And then his third start, he went 33 of 47 for 70.2%. Completion rate for 334 yards, 3 touchdowns, no picks against Nebraska. And they scored 27 points. But to me, I thought he did some nice things. Ran for a touchdown, also had 21 rushing yards, went for over 20 in each of his first 2 games, minus 23 against Nebraska, had a rushing touchdown against them. So I think Jack Plummer to me is the key. The thing about Aiden O'Connell is that's the other quarterback you're referring to, right?
He's a senior. Plummer's a junior.
He's a nice player. He did some nice things last year too. 2 for 282 and 3 touchdowns in a win over Iowa. He went 29 of 35. That's 82.9%. Twice last year they had a quarterback complete over 80% of his passes. 371 yards, 2 touchdowns, and then this last game, which was a loss to Northwestern, he threw for 263 yards and 2 touchdowns. And so, I mean, they did some nice things as far as moving the football. They did some nice things as far as putting yards in the air. The problem is couldn't really run the football,
and that's I think is going to be their biggest issue this year as well.
And it's not a running back problem. Xander Horvath is a quality football player. I mean, not a guy that should threaten Notre Dame. We're just talking Purdue overall, not necessarily matchup against Notre Dame.
You're aware he's from the area, right? He went to Marion High School. Yeah, I coached against him many times. He's a big boy and hard to bring down.
Yeah, but he ran for 377 yards and averaged 4.8 yards in 2019. In 2020, last year in 6 games, he ran for 442 yards, 5 yards a carry, 2 touchdowns. He's a nice back. King Doru is a name that some Notre Dame fans might remember. He's been banged up the last 2 years. If he's finally healthy and still there,
I'm going to need him to be.
Yeah, that's going to add a little bit to it. But and their quarterback Plummer's not a stiff, right? I mean, so they're able to move the football somewhat effectively. But man, they were through the air, but they were a terrible rushing team last year. They were so bad running the ball the last 2 years that they make USC go, man, you guys don't run the ball at all.
Because they couldn't.
Yeah,
I mean, they just weren't very good at it.
And that's just something like when you look at Jeff Brom's offenses at Western Kentucky, they ran the ball. There was 1 year they were 20 yards rushing. His first 2 years, they were okay, 151 and then 136. They were about 4.5 a carry. Last 2 years, they've been 83.3 and 81.5 yards per game rushing.
And 81.5 puts you at 124 in the
You can't be that bad.
Exactly.
And you can't chalk it up to a COVID year because they were just as bad the year before.
Right.
I mean, 2009. Yeah. And matter of fact, they ran the ball better last year. They were 3.3 yards per carry as opposed to 2. When you jump up to 3.3 yards per attempt and people say, wow, you improved, that's a problem.
That's a huge problem. They were last in the Big Ten last year in rushing.
Yeah.
Last.
By quite a bit, wasn't it?
If
I remember correctly.
I'm sorry, but if you're coming in last in any category in the Big Ten, that's a huge problem. It's a huge problem.
Yes. Oh no, I'm sorry. Michigan State was only 10 yards ahead of them.
Only.
But okay, so Michigan finished 11th out of 14. Michigan had 50 more yards per game rushing than Purdue. So they're 14 to get to 11. That's still bad.
Right.
You have to get 50 more yards per game rushing.
Per game.
And the big problem has been the O-line. That's been the issue.
Yep.
And they get no push at all.
Which is, again, like I said, broken record. That's the matchup in this game. Yeah. It's Notre Dame's defensive line versus Purdue's offensive line. I feel bad for Xander Horvath, who's going to be coming home basically to play a game, and I just don't think he's going to see the light of day. I don't
see them making a big jump. But big picture wise, before we dive into the Notre Dame matchup, if Purdue's going to have don't be sorry, it's all good. We can go back and forth. That's what makes these shows fun, right?
Absolutely, I'm enjoying it. Really, I am.
For Purdue to make a bowl game this year, the biggest thing that's going to have to change is that right there.
Correct.
Because if their offensive line like in 2017 and 2018, they weren't great up front, but they could at least hold their own. And at times they were pretty good. They had an experienced unit. In 2018, they were able to run the ball all over Ohio State in that game. But you've got it. This group has to be better. They have to be able to give them some semblance of and look, if they run for only 130, 140 yards a game this year, that's not great. But at least gives them some sort of balance where you have to somewhat respect the run game. They've got 2 starters coming back on the offensive line, which is not a good sign. But skill-wise, you look at David Bell, Milton Wright, Malik Carr, TJ Sheffield, a guy that was committed to Notre Dame for 5.5 minutes. There's talent there. Again, not, oh my God, they might beat Notre Dame talent, but like, hey, these guys got some talent. I like Jack Plummer. Aiden O'Connell at quarterback, to me, you got to hope if you're a Purdue fan. If you're Jeff Brom, if I'm his brother, I think his brother's still the quarterback's coach, right, Brian?
Oh.
You have to sit there and think to yourself, I pray that Jack Plummer wins the job.
He's the offensive coordinator.
Okay, well, Jeff still calls plays, but yes, he's the offensive coordinator.
Gotcha.
So I thought he was still there.
Sorry.
It's okay. He's part of the conversation, man.
They've got co-offensive coordinators according to Athlon. It's Jamarcus Shepard and Brian Brom.
Yeah. So, the play caller is Jeff Brom.
Right. Right.
But
as it should be, by the way.
Correct. Vince, here's the deal. Essentially, when you look at this offense, like the offensive line has to be at least good enough to allow them to say, hey, if you're not going to respect our run game, we can run it on you. You have to at least somewhat respect that part of the game. Mm-hmm. That has to be better. Skill-wise, if Aiden O'Connell is your starting quarterback, he's not going to make a lot of mistakes, but I don't think he's going to make a ton of plays either. You have to be thinking to yourself, if you're Brian Brom, if you're Jeff Brom, I really hope Jack Plummer wins the job. Now, you don't hand it to him because he's got to earn it, because Aiden O'Connell's done enough at Purdue to say, hey, I deserve a shot to win the job myself. You don't just hand it to Jack Plummer. But Jack Plummer's the more talented kid. He just is. Mm-hmm. And he's the more athletic kid, I believe. He's the bigger kid. He's got the better arm. You need him to win the job. If he doesn't, that's going to be – it could be a little bit troubling. But when I look at this team, Vince, this is the side of the ball that has to be their strength. Has to be their strength. They have to get better here. And if they don't do that, then you start saying to yourself, okay, you're now 5 years in and you haven't figured this thing out with your offensive line. To me, that's a really bad sign and starts making you say, maybe Jeff Brom and there's not a higher person on Jeff Brom than me, right?
Yeah.
For where he's been.
Yeah.
But look, if you can't get this thing turned around, then you have to start talking to yourself about, hey, maybe he's just a great offensive mind, but not a great head coach at this level.
Sure.
And there's a difference. And this is the year he's got to go out and prove that, because look, it's your team now. You can't blame it on the roster you inherited from Darrell Hazell.
This is year 5. This is year 5, right? Yeah. So these are his guys. I mean,
this whole roster's his now.
Yeah, exactly.
You're back to having your offense, right? Your offense is the way that it is. You've had your off season is where it is, and so there's really no excuse to get it. And to me, I look at this unit and I say, They've got 2 offensive line coaches, which is needed. I'm sorry, they got to get it going.
Yeah,
they got to get.
There's no more excuses. There's no more, or look, I should say, there's no more built-in excuses, right? I mean, something could happen, of course, but you're right. In year 5, it's kind of make or break. There has to be a considerable stride for Purdue, and I'm not saying they can't do it, because I think they can do it, but I kind of need to see it though too, because I know we've hampered we've talked a lot about the run game, but that's the biggest thing for me. I mean, if they can't at least make that a threat, then this isn't going to work, right? I mean, you can have the most explosive pass game in the country, but if you don't have a run game at all, then look at Oklahoma. Nobody talks about their run game, but it's a very, very, very nice compliment, to what they want to do in the pass game. You just have to have it, and they just don't right now. And this is the perfect opportunity to prove people like me wrong, frankly.
Right. That's going to be the matchup, though, right? As we kind of look at this from a Notre Dame standpoint, can Notre Dame's front four? If Notre Dame's front four doesn't dominate this matchup, I'm going to be a little nervous.
Yeah.
Now, I expect Purdue to be better, but I'm going to be nervous because even better, this is not a team that should be able to get movement against Notre Dame. And if Notre Dame's front four can't rush the quarterback in this game, I'm going to be a little nervous, but it's going to be more about shutting down the run. If you can't dominate the run game, I'm going to be nervous in this game.
Absolutely.
I think Purdue's offensive line is pretty decent at protecting the quarterback, or at least it should be. When you look at the run game, though, that's a bit of a problem.
Well,
that's a bit of a problem.
Yeah, exactly. And I don't think that Purdue might get a big run game against Connecticut, which is the week before Notre Dame.
Yeah, their run game has to get going against the other teams on the schedule. It can't against Notre Dame because of what Notre Dame's strengths are as a defense.
Yes, exactly. And I'm not going to throw out numbers right now until I see what Notre Dame does the first 2 weeks of the season, obviously. But they can't. They should hold Purdue to under 100 yards rushing. I mean, they absolutely should.
Yeah. Unless they get like some yards late in the game, something like that.
And that's different. I mean, you're right. That's a very good point. I mean, if Notre Dame is in a place where they're subbing and things of that nature, then they rip one off, right?
Right. Bless you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
But I just don't see this Purdue.
And that's how you neutralize the talent that they have at the skill positions. Exactly. Best way to take David Bell out of the game, make sure the quarterback's laying on his back.
Exactly. Because you don't want to make him as uncomfortable as possible.
Right.
I mean, that's the bottom line.
That's the key. No question. Defensively, Vince, this is the side of the ball that does need to carry the team, but it's got to get a lot better. I mean, their defense in recent years has been abysmal. Last year, they gave up 29.8 points per game. That was their best mark in 3 years.
You're right.
They'd been over 30 the 2 previous years. And they gave up 20, 24, 27, 34, 37, and 37 points. Now, it wasn't a couple of those. They gave up like a kick return for a touchdown against Rutgers, so a couple of those weren't quite there yet. But, I mean, they got to get a lot better on defense.
But they're still in the bottom half of the Big Ten, all of the defensive
everything.
And that's not going to win you the ball games that you need to win.
Now, they hired a new defensive coordinator. Brad Lambert's their new defensive coordinator. He came from Marshall. Marshall had the number 1 scoring defense in the country last year and the number 2 total defense in the country last year. So
they basically cleaned house on the defensive side of the ball,
right?
Because they've got a new D-line coach, they got a new corners coach. I want to say they're new all over the place.
Yeah. The Bob Diaco experiment did not work.
1 year and done.
Yeah, it did not work.
Done. Yeah,
but the thing I like about the Brad Lambert hire is, and why I didn't like I hope the Bob Diaco is going to work out because I actually like Bob Diaco. He's not like him from I'd want to hang out with him because he just would kind of just a strange cat, but he was always a good guy. The players liked him. They respected him. I never heard anything bad about him as a person, all that, he did a great job turning Notre Dame around defensively, but that wasn't going to work. Bob Diaco was successful at Notre Dame because he had great players, and he knew how to put them in the right play. I mean, you look at some of the players he had in 10 to 12. You're talking about Harrison Smith, Manti Te'o, Capron, Lewis Moore, and 11 and 12. He had Stephon Tuitt, Aaron Lynch in 11. You had Stephon Tuitt in 2012. You had Lewis Nix.
Right.
You had some Darius Fleming. You had a lot of guys that went to play in the National Football League. And he was good at teaching them how to play and line up correctly and then just go be better than who you're playing against.
And you've seen coaches like that in your career, right? Guys that are really good coaches with talent. Right. They're really good at communicating with those guys, put them in a position to be successful.
Teach them how to play.
Absolutely. Right. But then there's guys that are much better teachers, right?
And that's also where Bob Diaco was. Yeah. Correct.
Right.
The problem he had was he wasn't you need to be a great teacher to coach at a place like Purdue. Yes. But you also have to be really creative schematically because you're never going to have the players of the top 6 to 8 teams in your league. Yeah. And that's the thing. And when you're doing what Bob Diaco did and he just didn't adjust, we had a question about this, I think it was last week, what happened to him?
Right. Yeah.
He just never adjusted to the changes in the game. Teams could just run all over his defense. Well, it's one thing you couldn't do against his defense in Notre Dame. And it's because he didn't evolve with the times. And you see all these spreads and all these type of things. But again, it was just he didn't have the horses. He didn't have a Manti Te'o or a Lewis Nix or a Capron Lewis Moore or a Harrison Smith.
Right.
That he could just say, hey, go dominate, right? And Stephon Tuitt kind of guy. So he tried. That's just kind of what he needed to be. And that's, you're thinking about where he came up from when he was at Iowa for all those years. That's who Iowa was. I mean, Iowa had these big, strong, tough, smart kids. And Iowa for a lot of times produced really good college linebackers.
Yeah.
Bob Diaco was one of those. And it was a line up and play because back then the Big Ten was run the football and ground and pound. And that's who he was. Well, the game changed.
Right.
And he didn't have very good players at Purdue. And he didn't know how to be creative enough to do that. Well, when you're coming from Marshall, you're not coaching a team loaded with future NFL draft picks. You've got to know how to teach. You got to know here's how to line up. Here's how to execute. Here's the fundamentals of the game. But you also have to be creative enough schematically to say, hey, we're going to put our players in position to be successful, but also put our players in position where we're going to create some issues for the other team.
Right.
And that's going to be the key.
Yep, absolutely.
And so can Brad Lambert be that guy? I don't know. We'll find out. He doesn't have to be great. They don't have to become the best defense in the Big Ten. They just have to be a lot better. I mean, they have to get down to me. They've got to get closer to, the 24 points per game kind of thing. That, to me, that's where they need to be, Vince. They just have to be able to make enough stops on defense to win some games. Because, again, you look at last season. They lost by 7 to Northwestern, 3 to Minnesota, 7 to Rutgers, 10 to Nebraska, which means they were 6 defensive stops away from being undefeated.
Well, and
it's a bit hyperbolic, but you get the point that I'm making.
But the point is made. I mean, the point is made that they don't have to be light years better defensively to be in these games, and they're in those games already. But to win those games, and then they gave up 30 points a game. They scored 27 points a game.
Right.
You can't obviously. Right. I mean, simple math, right?
And it was the same thing in 2019. They went 4-8. They lost by 3 points in Nevada because they couldn't make stops in the fourth quarter.
Right, exactly.
They lost by 7 points to Minnesota. Again, couldn't make late stops. They lost by 6 points at Iowa, a top 25 team. Again, couldn't make stops late when you needed it. And lost by 3 points at home to Indiana.
That's 4 losses right there. Yeah.
I mean, right there, if you win 2 of those, just split those 4 games. You're a bowl team. If you win 3 of those 4 games, you're 7-5, and now all of a sudden you're recruiting better and all those type of things. So they got blown out by TCU at home that year. They got blown out at Penn State, and they got blown out at Wisconsin that year. All their other games were somewhat. Even the game against Illinois, they lost 24-6. That was a game where their offense was just ravaged. But look, the reality is your defense has to be able to make 2 more stops a game.
Right.
Than what you're making now.
Your defense has to complement the offense,
right?
Because they already have the number 1 passing offense in the Big Ten. I mean, they're over 300 yards a game in the Big Ten, and that's a lot of yards in the Big Ten, right? 309. That puts them in
basically
number 1.
Rondale Moore barely playing.
Right. His stats were pedestrian because he was hurt the most of the season, right? And that puts them 16th in the nation in throwing the ball. So, look, I still think they're going to be able to throw the ball. Offensively, they need to complement the defense. I mean, the complement with the rushing, stats, and then defensively, if, like you said, if the if the scoring average can be less than the scoring average for the offense, that's going to be huge. And I know that sounds ridiculously simple, but they need to be around 24 or 23.
Yeah.
Like that would be perfect for them.
Yeah. Got to make more stops, which allows you to be more balanced on offense. Because the one thing is they threw for a lot of yards last year, but they also averaged 43.5 attempts per game. They were only at 7.1 yards per attempt.
Right.
That's not where you want to be. That's a pretty low yards per attempt average because basically they had to turn their perimeter pass game into the run game.
The run game. Yep.
That's exactly how it worked.
Yep.
So they got to be able to create some more big shots. But at the same time, if you're worried about your defense not being able to stop anybody, you're going to be a little nervous about taking a 1st and 10 shot that maybe put you in a position where you might have to go 3 and out because then all of a sudden you're going to give up 6.
And you got to worry about possessing the ball too.
Right.
I mean, that's
because you got to keep your defense off the field.
That's what I'm saying.
They're going to give up scores.
That's exactly right. And Xander Horvath, their starting running back, was 3rd or 4th on the team in receptions. I mean, he had 30 catches last year. So, he's going to be involved in the pass game. But again, that was their running game. I mean, that's how he was successful, getting yardage because he was catching the ball out of the backfield.
Right.
Let's see. He was their third leading receiver, 304 yards, 30 catches. So, again, you add that to his rushing. Well, now you're talking over 700 yards of offense, right? That's not terrible, right? So it's not a running back issue. Again, to just go back to the point that the offensive line just absolutely needs to be better.
Right. And a big part of that's going to be you have to be more disruptive on defense. And I'm looking at this. Like Purdue had only 15 forced turnovers in 2019 in 12 games. They only had 7 last year in 6 games. They've ranked 61st and 84th in tackles for loss the last 2 years. They're not a very disruptive defense.
Right.
They have to be more disruptive. And that's where those stops are going to come from. And that's where we're going to find out what Brad Lambert's all about because, that's going to be the key to saying, hey, look, can you be disruptive? Can you get after it? The one thing about his Marshall defense is as good as they were last year numbers wise, they were not great at producing tackles for loss. They ranked pretty low in the last 2 years in tackles for loss. So that's a bit concerning for me. But the end result was good. Can he carry that into Purdue? That's what we're going to find out. But that's going to be the key. Now, the one thing he has going for him is he's going to have one of the best defensive ends in the country this year in George Karlaftis, assuming he's healthy, something he was not last year. Had a great freshman year, didn't play great last year. The expectation is that he's going to be one of the best defensive ends in the country,
right?
I guess is a better way of saying that rather than he will be one of the best. The expectation is he's going to be one of the best.
Should be a good test.
Getting a lot of first-round love. I don't see that yet. I just don't.
It's based on reputation right now.
Right.
Yeah.
He's got to get a lot better, but he's a big, strong kid. And you were getting ready to say, Vince, correctly, this is going to be a big test for Blake Fisher and Josh Lugg. No question about it.
This will be their first opportunity to go up against, for lack of a better term, a stud defensive end, right? Somebody that can test them, somebody that, like you said, is getting NFL first round draft, talk. And so that's going to be the buzz going into this game. Okay, this the first real test for these tackles, for these inexperienced tackles. And I still say Josh Lugg is inexperienced. He only got 6 starts at tackle, and it was 2 years ago.
Yeah, 5.
So,
five.
I'm sorry,
yeah,
5.
Even fewer. No, I'm adding to your point, Alex. 5. Yeah.
Yeah. So look, this is going to be a great test for them, but I think it's a really good test. Like this is a good time to be tested. In game 3, you got 2 games under your belt. You most likely had to deal with a lot of line games and things like that in week 2. Well, now you're going into week 3, probably not as many line games, but better talent coming at you. And so I think this is well placed for this group. And again, it's going to be a good test for them and an appropriately placed test for these tackles.
They have two SEC transfers that I'm very curious to see. Number 1 is a linebacker from Auburn named O.C. Brothers. And from reading stuff, he didn't play much at Auburn, but from reading things, he was really good this spring for Purdue. Now, does that mean really good compared to the guys that they had?
Right.
or is he, a guy that can be really good as a Big Ten player? The other guy is a name that recruitniks that follow Notre Dame recruiting are going to remember. Remember Joseph Anderson from Tennessee a few years ago?
Oh, yeah.
Notre Dame liked him. They could have got him. He just didn't have the academics to get into Notre Dame quite. Good kid, but just couldn't get into school. Didn't play a ton at South Carolina, but he's a pretty big, talented kid. He transfers in as well. I think those two guys could help them, but they've got some of their ascending players, Anthony Watts, a couple guys like that. They got a hybrid end that they have DeMarcus Mitchell, who's he's a good football player, but the back seven is what returns a lot of players, and they're going to have to limit giving up so many big plays. That's kind of what killed him is they'd make a stop and then it's 3rd and 5 and you give up a 60-yard bomb, and those are the things that they're going to have to get better at is getting pressure on the quarterback, which means a healthy George Karlaftis, which he was not last year, which is, I was reading in the magazine, they're going to have to improve on their 5 sacks last year. And I'm like, because they only had 5 sacks in 6 games. I'm like, well, that's George Karlaftis' job. I mean, that's what you're hoping he's going to be.
Exactly.
And, so if you can have him be productive, that's going to be a key to him. He had 7.5 sacks as a true freshman in 2019. You needed him to get back to being that guy. And if he can be, then, you'll be able to be disruptive and do some nice things. But the front's going to be the key. And the thing I liked about Karlaftis in 2019 as a freshman is he didn't have like that one game where he had like 3 sacks. He never had more than 1.5 sack in a game. So, I mean, right.
Yeah.
That's going to be the key for him. So if he can do that, then, they'll have that guy that can rush the quarterback. And then you can maybe design some pressures to, if you're trying to focus your protection scheme to stop Karlaftis, then what you can do as a defensive coordinator to then counter that and bring some pressure from the other side or bring some pressure with Karlaftis where you can't put 2 guys on him because we're going to overload you that side and force you to go one-on-one with him, and he's got to win that one. So there's a lot of different things you can do if he's as good as advertised, but at the end of the day, this is going to be about coaching and can you figure out ways to get pressure because your talent's top to bottom not good enough to make this big jump by itself. Your talent's good enough to where they can improve with good coaching, but not improve all the way where they need to be, Vince. There's going to have to be, at some point in time, say, hey, look, we've got to figure out ways schematically to give these guys a chance to be effective and make stops.
And that's what you do when you have good – I mean, when you have players that you think are good, you scheme to get them involved. I mean, whether you're on offense or defense, that's your job as a coach, right? And so if George Karlaftis is as good as the recruit Knicks and everybody says, or I should say the draft Knicks, right? Because we've moved on from recruiting. If he's that good, then he'll show it. And look, I say this is a good opportunity for the tackles at Notre Dame. This is a great opportunity for George as well, because this is going to be his first opportunity to go up against, really good tackles in theory, right? Against Notre Dame's offensive line. And so your draft people are going to be taking a really close look at this particular game early on in the season for George Karlaftis to see if he is as advertised, right? Coming off that injury-plagued season. So it's a big game. It's a big game for him, and it's a big game for these tackles for sure.
Yeah, so how the game plays out, to me, the key for Notre Dame are going to be twofold. Number one, getting a fast start on them offensively. If Notre Dame can come out and score early, get Purdue out of any thought of being balanced, any thought of controlling the clock, and force them to kind of have to pick it up, that's obviously where you want to be. You want to put them in a bind. What happened against Ohio State is Ohio State didn't score early. Purdue didn't really start ripping them off until second, third, quarter, and then they put them away in the fourth quarter. They weren't ripping them necessarily early, but Ohio State couldn't put them away. You let Purdue stay in that game, get confident, and then all of a sudden Purdue got hot and started taking advantage of your mistakes. Notre Dame offense now, game 3, you got to come out and be impactful early. You got to make plays early. You got to figure out a way to neutralize Karlaftis. If you can do that, you're going to be successful. And then defensively, it's you got to tackle in space. They're going to throw a lot of quick game. They're a pro style passing attack, spread the field, ISOs, those kind of things. Try to get guys free in space. You've got to be able to handle those things, handle the high lows, be disciplined in coverage, but then tackle in space. And then the other key is dominate the line of scrimmage. And this is what we talk about the D line. Like, you could make a case that Toledo has the best offensive line Notre Dame's going to face in the first 3 games. Am I wrong?
Nah, I mean, you can make a real good case.
It's debatable. It's debatable, but
they've got more all-conference players than any of the 3 first.
Yeah, I mean,
lines.
Florida State's line stinks,
but still,
Florida State's line stinks.
No.
I don't know if there's a lot of all-MAC players on Florida State's offensive line or on Purdue's offensive line.
What I'm saying.
You know what I mean?
Is what I'm saying.
So Yeah. So the defensive line really needs to dominate early in the season. And if you can't dominate the first 3 games, it's like, maybe what's going to happen when you play Cincinnati and Wisconsin and North Carolina? Yeah.
Right.
Like, no, we didn't say that. We never said the D-line was going to be great. Hey, and by the way, I don't know what happened, how all of our summer YouTube videos got deleted. I have no clue what happened, you know? Yeah, that's it. That's a good excuse. We got hacked. Yeah.
Well, I will say with this being the last game of the first quarter, right, for Notre Dame, this is the game preceding Wisconsin. And at this point, I need to see the offense. Yeah, like I need to see the offense
start really catching,
and that's what I'm saying. Like
the timing, all that.
It should not be an issue coming out fast and coming out strong against Purdue offensively. Because by now, if you're not doing that by now, I'm really worried about week 4, and that's I will hold that thought for quite a while. And then defensively, you talked about they have to be good in space, they have to be able to tackle in space. Look, they're going to be going up against Notre Dame's offense all August. And I think that's what a lot of Notre Dame stuff is going to be. So I think this defense is going to be ready to be effective in space, because that's what they're going to be seeing when they're going up against the number ones on the offensive side for Notre Dame. So I do think that they're going to be up to the task of shutting down this Purdue offense. Now, look, this kind of an offense is going to have big plays. Could they break one on Notre Dame? Sure, they could. It's absolutely possible.
Sure.
But I think overall, I like where Notre Dame's defense is going to be at this point in Game 3.
And we're and something I'm looking to see is, I think a really good D line is also a smart D line. Meaning, look, Purdue knows that they can't block Notre Dame's D line all game, so there's going to be a lot of quick game, a lot of hit your drop and get rid of the ball. You got long guys like Isaiah Foskey, and are you getting your hands up? Are you disrupting in that regards? Those are things that could be key too. So we're going to learn a lot about this football team, and this is the game that's really going to test the Notre Dame defense, in my opinion. Back 7, this is the game that's going to test that, because this is the best group of skill players I think Notre Dame's going to face the first 3 games,
and the best scheme too. I mean, all of the above. Yep. You know what I mean? Yeah, I completely agree.
Which means how do you neutralize that? Dominate in the trenches. Mm-hmm. That's the key.
Yep.
That's going to be the key for Notre Dame. So that's where we're at with Notre Dame's first 2 opponents. Next time we talk, we're going to dive into we'll start getting into the Wisconsin, Cincinnati, and maybe Virginia Tech in our next one. We'll see how. I mean, I didn't think we'd talk about Purdue and Toledo for an hour and a half.
Neither did I.
But
that's how much we miss football, everybody.
Right, exactly. That we could talk about Purdue and Toledo for an hour and a half.
Right.
So I was like, we'll go about 20. So in the pregame, so I'm gonna give you guys a little like inside baseball. We're probably talking about each of these teams for about 20 minutes, and and then we'll dive into questions. Nope. But
we miss football.
Yeah, but that's it. I mean, look again. These are 2 teams that Notre Dame should convincingly beat, but these are 2 teams that will also allow us to learn a lot about Notre Dame.
Correct, and that's key.
And you can learn about yourself in games that you should win, and you do win. And so we'll find that. So that's going to be it for the Toledo and Purdue preview. We'll be back tomorrow. Again, we're going to have Q&A, but we're going to kind of wrap up the podcast portion of this show. We'll be back tomorrow to talk about the 5 biggest concerns we have about the Notre Dame football team heading into 2020. And then Thursday, we'll dive into these are our normal 1 o'clock slots. Thursday, we'll dive into the next group of opponents, which begins with Wisconsin. And, of course, tomorrow night at 5 p.m. Eastern, we will carry Tobias Merriweather's announcement of his commitment. It's going to be between Notre Dame, Stanford, Oregon, and USC. Tennessee's listed, but they're not really a factor, so it's going to be one of those teams. Again, we're thinking that Notre Dame is in position to close this one out. So we'll do that at 5 o'clock. Friday will be mailbag. Saturday, we'll have
post-practice report.
Post-practice report, and then Sunday we'll be there for whenever CJ Williams makes his decision. We'll have a show around that time as well. So very, very busy week. So that's going to be it. But this is kind of, so we finally got to the Purdue Toledo, Vince. It seemed like we were never going to get here.
I know,
but we got here.
Very upset people that we hadn't gotten here yet. So here we are.
So make sure you hit the like button, hit the subscribe button. Hit the notification bell so you get all of our podcasts. Check out irishbreakdown.com. You see it down there, boards.irishbreakdown.com. If you are watching on via YouTube, you can see the link below to the Built Bar advertisement. You get 10% off your entire purchase. We've had a lot of people do that already, which is kind of exciting. I got mine yesterday, Vince, so don't tell Chloe.
Yeah,
I got my cherry barcia and the double chocolate. Today. My wife was like, so we're going to split these or not? And I was like, I thought you were allergic. She goes, nope, I'm good. I'm like, I think she's really willing to sacrifice getting sick to have a cherry barcia. So she she reaches in, just grabs a handful of my cherry barcias, and she's like, I'll give you some of my double chocolates. I'm like, well, okay, but,
one of those.
Yes, dear.
Exactly.
So you have those, and if you're listening via podcast, essentially, if you go look at our page, we have a deal where if you use the promo code Irish Breakdown, no space, just all caps, Irish Breakdown, all together, one word, basically, for Built Bar, you get 10% off your entire purchase. So you can check that out, and we will be back again tomorrow to talk more Notre Dame football. But for you watching on the YouTube channel, we're not done.
We're back.
I'm going to be honest, though. We're not going to have a lot of questions today. And I don't necessarily say this is a problem, but there's way too much conversation going on today about stuff that has nothing to do with the podcast.
Yeah, I'm all the way at the top.
A ton of questions were booted. So, I mean, like Ladarius, we love you, man, and we appreciate you being a part of the show. But what we're going to ask is, like, during the actual podcast part, that you don't talk about 75 things that have nothing to do with the podcast or Notre Dame football. We'll get into that stuff, and I want to answer your questions. All I'm saying is, when you do it all so early, it just bumps all your early questions, and then we're just not able to get to the questions. So all we ask is that just keep the conversation about the podcast as much as possible early, and then we can dive into it. Look, as y'all know, we'll talk about whatever the heck you want to talk about after the show.
Oh yeah.
Right, but we're just going to miss a ton of questions. And I get emails, "Hey, why didn't you answer my question?" Because it got booted. We lose a ton of questions. So all we ask is that we just try to stick to the podcast topics as much as possible, so that way we can kind of get to those comments and questions immediately after the podcast, and then we can dive into talking about whatever the heck that you guys want to talk about. So
absolutely,
that's all we ask. And I mean, I'm not going to make you do it. I'm not going to boot somebody for wanting to talk football. I'm not going to do that. It's just a request. It's a request.
It just makes it complicated to find actual questions,
right?
So, and that's what just saying, that's what the board's for, baby.
Right.
Join the board, and you guys can have all the convo you want, baby.
Right. And Ladarius, if you want to join the Irish Breakdown message board, you can ask me about Bama, anybody heck you want to.
Yeah, absolutely.
And look, we welcome fans of other places and
with open arms.
Yeah, just be respectful, and it's always been that way. But just turn the show if you guys could just try to just.
I'm super
stick to the topic.
Get to where whatever you're talking about, because I'm totally in the dark.
No, there's it's nothing. It's nothing bad. It's nothing bad. It's just
comments,
literally, I've seen 75 different. I mean, not literally 75, but I see all these different topics. We're talking about Ohio State and Michigan. We're talking about Alabama's rivalry against Arkansas and Tennessee. It's just like, okay,
gotcha.
What the heck? So, yeah.
All right. Well, I've got one to jump into. Dan Clement says, "Coaches, yesterday there was a comment about guards playing center.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe for a football 101, you could explain the difficulty of the center position. For example, snapping, stepping, punching all at once."
So, I mean, you kind of just did it. I mean, Dan,
that's exactly what I was going to say.
It's
in a nutshell.
So, as a center, there's a lot on your plate. Before the snap, you're setting the protection side, you're setting the calls, you're making sure everything gets lined up, because the center has veto power essentially over. I always use these political references, right? But the center has veto power. If the center makes a call, I don't care what call you made. If the center makes a call, you're doing what the center says. He's the quarterback of the offensive line. And so there's obviously the mental part of it. It's not just about, okay, I'm working on a combo block with you. It's I'm letting the quarterback know where we're setting the protection. I'm doing all those other types of things. Then at the snap, where as a guard, I'm taking my step and I'm getting my hands on you, or a tackle, I'm getting to my pass set and I got both hands. A center has to snap with one hand, and then if you're blitzing or there's an aggressive defense, I got to then use my other hand to block, and then I got to bring my other hand with me. And so you're at a disadvantage in a lot of ways. So it requires great leverage. It requires great technique. It requires strength. And it's also why you don't see centers blocking by themselves a whole lot. That's why guards help with that. So it's like, hey, you use your hand to keep it here. But what can happen is not every guy has – it's like with anything. Not every guy is going to snap the ball with the same arm speed. So one guy may be a little slower getting the ball back there. The other guy may have fast hands to get him back out there. I mean, not everybody has the same hand speed. You watch boxing. Not everybody the same weight has the same punching speed or punching power. All those things are different. So if you don't have really fast hands, if you don't have really strong hands, you can get in trouble. If you're a light center, it can create some issues depending on what kind of scheme you run. To where in Notre Dame's scheme, where they're a zone team, if you have a center that can't get movement right up the middle of the offensive line, you're going to be in trouble. If you have a center that gets knocked back when he snaps the ball because he doesn't have fast hands or powerful hands, or he's maybe a little bit light, then that's going to really junk up your zone scheme. Because the best way to beat a zone, in my opinion, Vince, I've always felt is if you can just if you beat us up the middle in a zone, we're in trouble.
Yeah, and that's everything you just said is absolutely true. And then you tack onto that if they're playing an odd front with a nose just right on the center's head. That's always the most challenging thing for a center is when you've got somebody right on your head as you're trying to snap the ball. Then you got to block them. It's so much easier when he's in a gap. I mean, it just is. And so, yes, you can get a guard to help you, et cetera. But that it really tells a lot about a center when they go up against a nose, especially a new center, right? So that's something to keep an eye on too.
Yeah. So when you look at that, also again, it's experience. And not everybody's comfortable snapping and stepping at the same time. Sometimes it's just
it takes
snap,
practice.
Then I do everything.
Yeah.
And you're never snapping and stepping forward at the same time, or rarely you're doing that. It's more of a snap and step as kind of one continuous quick motion. There may be times you're going to snap and kind of step, but if you start stepping too much as you're snapping, all of a sudden, you've got a little area you got to get the ball through.
Yeah.
And you start kind of going this way, then it throws the ball off. So those are all things, Vince, that are part of what go into making that a challenge. And again, it's not something everybody can do, but it's what I think it used to be where coaches really felt they had to recruit a center. They had to recruit someone who could do that.
Right.
In the last 10, 15 years, you're seeing more and more of that. Hey, I look for certain traits, but I can teach a guy to snap the ball.
Right.
It's not always true, but
which is true. Yeah. Like
it's not as difficult as right. And the reason for that is shotgun. Shotgun snapping is easier than snapping to a center. It just is, because you have to be so precise so if I have my hands underneath, as a quarterback, right? If you're not getting that ball up in here, that's how fumbles happen.
Yep.
I mean, I've seen more quarterback center exchanges muffed in under center than I've seen in the shotgun. I mean, if you just sail one, you sail one. But like, if you're off, I mean, it's real precise in my opinion.
There's a lot more room for error. You know what I mean?
When you have to stay there to make sure that the ball. I mean, you're kind of like you're really riding that thing up. Where shotgun, you can just kind of snap it back. And you get real good at just like really quickly getting it back, and now I'm getting into my block.
Well, and you see a lot of guys grab like the point of the ball and snap that way because it's quicker. It's easier for some guys to do that.
Can't do that. I mean, you have to turn that thing. You have to, and you have to put it up there with some force. Like I need you to snap that thing into my hand. I need you to get it into my palm immediately.
Yep.
So that way, that part, and then I can grip it as I get back. Those kind of things. But
it's a timing thing too, with the quarterback pulling, and I mean, it takes. That's why back in the day when you and I played, Brian, I'm assuming you were not in shotgun your whole career as a high schooler.
Like 1 year high school, 1 year of college. Okay. That was it.
Yeah. So that's why it was quarterback center exchange before practice every single day.
Yeah.
And they'd gotten away from that a little bit at some places because it's not as hard. I mean, it doesn't take as much practice. You know what I mean? Every single day, quarterback centers better be out 15 minutes before everybody else.
And Notre Dame still does that.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean,
which they should.
And the other thing too is it's important because there are some differences of how. I mean, some centers are going to snap the ball and it kind of goes this way. Some centers snap the ball and it kind of wobbles. I mean, it just everyone's different, but it's just easier to do than this.
Right.
I have found, and I'll be honest with you. The other thing for a quarterback is the ball gets a lot less wet when you snap from shotgun. Because the problem is, and this is it's another thing, and I had this problem in college. My center was a bad sweater. Like he sweat a lot.
He sweat a lot, yeah.
But it wasn't just his hands and his arms. He sweat from his backside bad. So it was like sopping. And so you're snapping the ball up into that wetness there, which is nasty. And so when we would go shotgun, I'm like, thank God. But if you're a quarterback, that's a real thing.
It's a real thing.
Sweat. Go watch a football game, and you're going to see like that where the center snapping the ball is where football players tend to usually have the most sweat accumulating in their pants, and that can make it a challenge. Whereas if you're just snapping the ball past all that, then it's just your hand water. You just dry your hands off, and between every play, you're okay. So those are other things that factor into me why shotgun snapping is better. You have to think about that stuff, man.
I never thought about. I'd be honest. I've never thought about that. Wow.
Well, why would you need to? You're out there playing wide receiver.
I know, right?
I'm stalk blocking. You
need a triple option offense too.
Yeah, that's what I say. You're out there stalk blocking. You need to worry about that. So, yeah, we got a super chat, Vince. Where are you at the top? What?
I'm at the top. I've moved down to like 124.
Okay, so I'll go down here and get this. Ronald T'Challa, Ronnie, we appreciate you very much, buddy.
Ronald,
hope you're doing well and feeling good today.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Hopefully we help with that just a little bit.
Let's try to rock through some of these questions.
I'm going to
try to get through these.
Corey D, 1 month away from FSU ND. That's crazy, by the way, that we're a month away. So that's awesome. Glad you're pumped because I'm pumped too. Here we go. OC Irish fan. Coach, how many individuals make up a strength and conditioning staff? That's a really good
I think it's like 5.
And then they have interns too.
I think it's 4 assistants.
Is it 4 paid guys?
Yeah, Bayless, and then I think 4. So I think 5, I believe.
Okay.
But now you've got nutrition's going to be part of that. They're expanding the nutrition staff's part of that. You've got like Finn said interns, but like,
is there a limit? Is there a limit to that?
I don't think so.
I didn't think there was.
That's just how much you're willing to pay. I mean, that's
right.
Yeah,
I had a buddy who just got a job with the Notre Dame strength staff. So yeah, he's pretty pumped. He came over from Cincinnati, by the way. Same. It's funny how that works, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, see, you're having to go through a whole lot of comments. And
Lots of comments. Lots of comments.
So, yeah.
Here we go. I'll try this one. Christopher Sally says, Jason Candle was a hot name a few years ago and possibly moving on to a bigger job. I have not heard him mentioned recently. Has the shine come off that much?
Yeah, when you go 13-12 in 2 years, you're not in the MAC. You're not gonna be a hot name. And he really only had one great year at Toledo, and that hot name was more about just you'd seen Toledo guys getting jobs. Matt Campbell did a great job at Toledo, and had some power. I think they beat Arkansas one year under Matt Campbell. I believe they went to Arkansas and beat them. So. Yeah, he's this, but again, this is a year for him to get back to that. I mean, 4-2 last year was good. If they can go back and win, maybe 9-10 games this year, he'll start being a name again for some of these Big Ten, Power 5, some other Power 5 jobs.
Ladarius, does Notre Dame open up this year on a Thursday or Saturday? Neither. They open up on a Sunday night, which is the only game of the day against Florida State, Labor Day weekend, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And of course, everybody answered that question for him.
Yeah, which means we don't need to pull it up during the show. We can just kind
of I didn't know everybody answered it. I'm getting there.
Yeah. I'll answer one while you're doing that, Vince.
Thank you. Yeah, maybe we'll meet in the middle.
OC followed up with a strength conditioning cast. Does the strength conditioning staff handle all sports? Seems like a major challenge, i.e. football. No. And at a place like Notre Dame, in the Division III level, sometimes, yes, you have a strength coach that'll handle a lot more. But at the Division I level, you have a football strength staff, you have a basketball strength staff, you have a strength and conditioning program for all sports. Now, at some places, and I don't know if it's like this at Notre Dame, at some places you will have one strength coach who is sort of the overseer of all of it, but he will then hire people to run strength programs for other sports. But every sport usually has their own strength conditioning, some sort of strength conditioning program as part of what they do.
Yeah, that some of the Olympic sports might share one, like in different seasons kind of thing, but the football obviously
in basketball has their own.
Correct.
I'm pretty sure baseball has their own as well. But yeah, you know, and I would imagine for a lot of sports you have a men's strength coach and a women's strength coach because
it's just different.
The physiology is just different.
Absolutely. They may not have been the case in the past, but
and the games are different too. You know, how you play men's basketball is a little bit how you play women's basketball from a strength conditioning standpoint, along with the physiology. So yeah, that's also something that we'll see a little bit different.
Well, I just got bumped to 225.
Okay. So you lost a lot of questions.
I lost.
Yeah, it's not your fault.
I don't know if it was questions, but I definitely lost. I'm not running into many questions is the thing. Mm-hmm. So, Kai says, "Hey everyone, just wanting to set my alarm clock. What time are the shows on August 4th, 6th, and 8th? So the 4th is tomorrow. So that means we'll have a show at 1 o'clock, and then we'll have a show again at 5 o'clock, and then the 6th." Would be Friday, so just 1 o'clock. Mm-hmm. And then the 8th, do we have a time for that one?
I don't know that he has set a time yet.
I didn't see one when I was looking last night. That's all I can say to that. So it's whenever he sets his commitment time, like his announcement time. Mm-hmm. But yeah. So I think I got that one down.
Yep.
Getting into super conference chatting over here.
A lot of dead air because we're scrolling through a ton of comments.
Yeah, sorry about that, guys.
No, it's not. It's not on you, Vince. It's just this is an example of why it's easier if we just kind of just have some questions early, and then we can get into the conversation later. But again, it's just a request. If you guys want to keep talking, keep talking. I mean, this is
right. It is what it is.
Questions. I mean, if y'all just want to talk and we don't answer questions, I mean, that's fine.
Yeah.
I feel bad because people that do put questions in, we lose a lot of them, and I've gotten more and more comments lately from people of like, "Hey, was there something wrong with my question? Why didn't you answer my question?" Not in a accusatory manner, but just feeling like they did something wrong. When in reality, we never saw it because we get bumped so often because
it only comments. So a little peek behind the curtain, it holds on to about an hour's worth of questions, and then once you scroll to the bottom, it bumps you all the way to the bottom.
Right.
So yeah.
It's like I was at like 1:30 5 minutes ago, and then scrolled down to get that super chat,
and then
I was down to 2:30.
Right.
So,
and I'm down to 2:52. Still looking for questions. It's more like I said, lots of conversation.
Right.
I'll throw this one up just to hear what you have to say about it, Brian, because I know you've talked about Dan Mullen before at Florida. Ladarius says Dan Mullen would not be a great fit at Notre Dame. He can't win at Florida and has the best high school athletes around him. Not a great coach. I believe you feel differently.
Strongly disagree with that.
I wanted to give you an opportunity to talk about that.
Can't win at Florida. Okay. He's gone 10-3, 11-2. This year they went 8-4, but they made the SEC title game. He has yet to have a single recruiting class go through an entire tenure there. The guy won at Mississippi State. End of sentence. I mean, mic drop. With all due respect, my man, Dan Mullen's a really good football coach. Dan Mullen has won at Florida already. Again, 29-9 in 3 years. That's not too bad.
Right.
That's not too bad at all. Has an Orange Bowl win, has a Peach Bowl win. Last year, they finished the year ranked 13th. That was his worst finish at Florida. The year he played for the SEC title was his worst finish at Florida. So, now, is he a fit at Notre Dame? I don't know about that. I don't know if he's a fit at Notre Dame. Vince, you and I have had some conversations about that we won't get into here, but I don't know if he's a fit at Notre Dame. I don't know if he'd be a guy that would be at the top of my list when I'm looking for a Notre Dame coach.
Right.
But that's okay. That doesn't mean he's not a heck of a coach. You know, you're talking about a guy that had he was 23 games over 500 at Mississippi State.
That's not exactly. In the SEC, you're a low-level SEC team at that point.
I mean, how many big-time recruits are trying to go to Starkville?
Right.
I mean, with all due respect, that's not exactly a coaching hotbed. I mean, Jackie Sherrill, who I believe has a national championship under his belt, right? Went 52-28 and had 3 top 10 finishes at Georgia. Jackie Sherrill won a national championship at Pitt. Jackie Sherrill went 59-1 at Pitt. He went 52-28-1 at Texas A&M. Jackie Sherrill went 75-75 at Mississippi State.
Yeah. Right.
Dan Mullen's 20-20. And this is during a time when the SEC West was considered the best division in college football. I mean, so
yeah.
Yeah.
You want to grab that super chat since you're You were kind of hanging at the bottom there?
Yes, Corey D., I apologize for going on an Urban Meyer rant. It's all good. You have paid your penance with this super chat, so you're all good, buddy.
That's hilarious.
You're all good.
Thank you, Corey. We appreciate it very much.
Very much.
Curtis Hewitt says, I have to go. I'll watch later. This was fun. Thanks, IB Nation. I'm happy to now be a member. That's why I wanted to pull this one up.
Because he's referring to Curtis signed up for the message board. So
exactly. Yes. It's Vince and Brian. You guys are amazing. Well, we appreciate having you on board, Curtis. That is awesome. Here's kind of a funny one from Tommy Guns. He says, Brian and Vince, who's weirder, Harbaugh or Diaco?
Okay, I'm going to say Diaco because I think I'm okay. When I say this, this is not meant to be disrespectful. I'm not saying this is a joke, right? So you're laughing because you're going to make a joke. I'm not making a joke.
Okay.
I don't personally care much for Jim Harbaugh, but what I'm about to say is not meant to be disrespectful or a joke. I'm genuinely concerned about Jim Harbaugh. I think there's something wrong with him. Like some of the things he says and does and the way that he looks is a whole, it's completely different than how he was at Stanford with the Niners.
It is.
I genuinely am concerned that there's something wrong with him. So I don't know if I think he does weird things, but those aren't things he did at Stanford.
I will say that when he was coaching Stanford and he would come over to Notre Dame, obviously, and we would be in press conferences with him in person and all that, I was actually impressed. Like I was like, man, I was
kind of short, but he was very.
But I was impressed by him. You know what I mean? Like he didn't come off to me the way he comes off to me.
He kind of has this really odd, like looking into space, like.
Yeah.
So again, I'm like Bob Diaco was just a weird, squirrely dude, right?
Yeah.
I really genuinely think there's something wrong with Jim Harbaugh, and I don't mean that disrespectfully. I don't mean that as an insult. I don't mean that in I hate Michigan, which I do. It's why I don't hammer on Harbaugh as much publicly as I used to, because I'm like, there's something wrong with that guy, and I'm concerned. I hope I'm wrong. I hope he's just weird. I hope that's it. I mean, I wish that was it, but I genuinely think that there's something wrong with them, and so I have I don't mind hammering Michigan, but I'm a little less making fun of his weirdness I'll still hammer him as a coach because I don't think he's doing a good job coaching. But some of the antics, I'm just like, I'm not sure if I want to. Because if I find out that there is something wrong, if I find there's something wrong, I feel like a total D-bag for making fun of him if there's something wrong with him.
Right, exactly. Hey, Corey says, I think Purdue is a scary opponent. Should we win the game? Yes. But Purdue will play their best game against Notre Dame. Don't forget what they did to Ohio State a few years ago.
Yeah. Yeah, this isn't that team. There's I just
agreed with that.
This offensive line isn't there. That Purdue team in 2018 was a pretty good defense too, though. I'm trying to, if I remember correctly, Vince, I think that was by far their best defense. Let me look at it. No, it's what year did they? No, that was actually a bad defense. It was 2017 that they were a pretty good defense. 2018 they were a pretty bad defense. They just weren't bad against Ohio State that night.
Louis says, lifelong Notre Dame fan, but a Boiler alum. Purdue has hit the transfer portal hard in the offseason. Are there any Purdue transfers that you're high on? I'm hoping for a Notre Dame win, but Purdue shows some fight.
I think that actually is what we're going to see.
Yeah,
to be honest with you, I'm anticipating for this being a game that's going to be more competitive than maybe some people think. But honestly, at the same time, I just don't think that Purdue is necessarily good enough to stay with Notre Dame for 4 quarters. That's the problem. I don't see that. I think they got some good players. I think for Purdue, it's more about just battle against Notre Dame. Stay in that game, continue to make it a game for at least a while. To where, you've won your first 2 games, you beat Oregon State, you beat UConn, you battled Notre Dame for a while, but, a playoff team just wore you out on their place. Because the one difference between Ohio State from 2018 is that was at Purdue. This game is at Notre Dame.
Right.
So I don't know if it's going to be, I don't know if it's going to be the game that maybe some people think it is. I will say this, you talk about some transfers. We talked about a couple of them earlier. We talked about OJ Brothers. We talked about the kid from South Carolina, Joseph Anderson. I'm trying to look at a couple other.
They got a tackle from UTEP, I think. Yeah. But I think he started last year. I think he's in his second year as a transfer.
Yeah.
Off the top of my head from reading about those guys.
So I just don't think any of these transfers are necessarily needle movers, to be honest with you. I mean, just the guys that I've looked at. I'm trying to find a couple others to see if there's anybody that I forgot or I missed on. but I don't think these guys are necessarily needle movers. I think what they do is they just add needed depth, something that they didn't have. You're talking about Greg Long, who that's the kid. But again, he was a transfer last year, I believe, correct? But
yes, yeah, he was.
Yeah, but again, no offseason last year. That's the difference. I think that's something that Tyler Witt, I think, is another grad transfer. He is in his first year, I believe, from Western Kentucky, I believe, Vince. So he's another guy. I don't know a ton about him. None of those guys are needle movers to me. I think Joseph Anderson's the one that I think has just, again, this is based on his high school film. He didn't play a ton at South Carolina, but his high school film, if he taps into his potential, he's a guy that could maybe add some, he's a 6'4", 270-pound defensive end who could, give them 270-plus pound defensive ends that could be pretty good. So they can play big boy football a lot, maybe get slide in, play some 3 technique. But most of those guys are just guys that I view as, hey, they're giving them depth, and that's something they didn't have a lot of.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of the thing. We got an interesting super chat here from our guy David Knight.
Yeah, we
Welcome back to the show, my man. What's much. Up, got a new avatar and everything. It's like he's looking sharp. Got
I love that
the dress shirt on. But he says, do either of you find yourself calling plays on offense during the course of a game, or even calling defensive schemes? Can I take that one first?
Yeah, absolutely. Yes.
Not anymore.
Really?
I was really bad about that my first few years, because I would find myself trying to think about it from a coaching standpoint of like what they should call. There was actually, Vince, you remember this? Do you remember when I used to video games for ISD?
Yeah.
So then I could do breakdowns later. They were playing, I think it was Michigan, and they were getting ready to snap the ball, and I knew Notre Dame was getting ready to run flood. And I said, I think it was like right before the snap, or at the snap, I was like, watch TJ Jones on this one, because I didn't realize I had left the mic on. And so Dane Chris rolls out and throws over top to TJ Jones on a flood concept for a touchdown. Because normally a flood, the go route, the outside go routes, the not a part of the read per se. Normally it's just you're taking the top off the defense to read the high-low underneath it. Well, this particular look, I was like, because of what I had seen from them before. So what I found is it was harder for me to track the game the way that I need to do my work when I'm looking at it from a here's what I would call or here's whatever else. And then I found myself being critical of it because I wouldn't have called it that way.
Right.
And I don't think that's a fair analysis to say, well, I would have called this. Okay, but did that play make sense? Was that a good call based on just did it work? Did it attack the defense the right way? Maybe my personal preference would have been to run this concept against cover 2, but they ran that and it worked, and or it didn't work because of that. So I've tried to really get myself out of that, David, and get more into observing what was called and analyzing what was called, and not thinking about what should have been called. I will do that at times because, again, if it doesn't work, I say, hey, look, here's what could have worked in that instance. Here's what they should have done. But I try to get away from that, because then it's just a constant criticism, even plays that work. I say, yeah, that worked, but they probably should have done this. Well, based on what? Well, that's my preference. Well, that's not a fair way to evaluate, in my opinion, of what I would have done. Because it's more about, okay, this is what they did, this is what worked, this is why it didn't work, and looking at it from that way. So it doesn't mean I don't do it from time to time. I will say things like, hey, I think they're going to come back to this. Like, I remember when they did that reverse we're talking about against Georgia Tech, I was like, oh, they're going to come back to that one, because I could see the backside not respecting it. So I was like, they're going to come back to that. And then, of course, he did the very next play. So I'm pointing that out.
Yeah.
Or I may say, hey, man, like, one thing I complained about in the Georgia game of 2019 was Georgia started the game without Tyson Campbell. Their starting cornerback, who was a number 1 overall pick of the second round of this year's last NFL draft. And then on the first drive of the game, Liam Eichenberg knocked out Eric Stokes, who was a first-round NFL draft pick. It wasn't until like the third quarter that Notre Dame actually went – late in second quarter with Lawrence Keys, and Notre Dame actually attacked their corners on the outside. And it wasn't just Ian Book not looking at it. They weren't calling a lot of plays. I mean, there comes a point in time where you say to your quarterback, okay, they have both of their backup quarterbacks in the game. If you don't throw the freaking go route to Chase Claypool the next time we call this play, I'm going to strangle you, or I'm going to put somebody else in. You know what I mean? Like, that's what you do. And they never did that. So there have been times there, but it's not. So I'm trying to get away from the anticipatory nature of that evaluation and just reacting to what is called. I think that gives it a more fair, that allows me doing my job to do more fair evaluation. Now, when I'm watching the game on a Sunday, I look at it a little bit differently. So that way, when we do our show on Monday, I can kind of be more analytical or critical or praiseworthy of what they called and maybe what I would or shouldn't have done. But I've really tried to get away as much as I can from the here's what I would have done, or even guessing, ooh, I think here comes, I bet you they're going to run 4 verts here. Because then I'm not really paying attention to what they are doing. I'm more thinking about, well, if I was still coaching. And it's gotten a lot easier over the years. It's still a challenge, but when I first started coaching, it was like I was the offensive coordinator and I would get frustrated because no one could hear me. I'm like, is this mic not working? Like, you know what I mean? Like, and it get frustrating. And I think that's why my earlier work was so much more critical of that kind of stuff, because it was more based on what I would have done as a coach. And I don't think that's necessarily a fair way of looking at it. It's more about what would or wouldn't work. Now, there are some things that I say, I'm critical Coach Alexander for, the way he coaches receivers. That's a little different than play calling, because that's you have to develop your players from that kind of standpoint. So
for me, I'm more of a scheme. Like I would love to see them do this, or like at the beginning of a drive, like I'd really like to see them hammer the run here. So I'm more, I guess, of a general, like, this is what I'd like to see happen on this drive kind of thing. I don't ever find myself wanting to call plays. And full disclosure, when I was offensive coordinator, I didn't call the plays. My head coach did. I was the guy in the box who would make suggestions that would get taken most of the time, but I wasn't the play caller. And when watching Notre Dame games, like, play calling is an art, man. Like, you call something to set something else up generally, or you're thinking 2-3 plays ahead. When I'm watching Notre Dame games, I'm taking notes. I'm doing other I'm not in that mindset of like thinking ahead and think like things of that nature. But like I said, when it comes to like scheme or like defense, like, hey man, I really think they should be doing this. Yeah, like ahead of time. But again, it's more scheme oriented than specific play calling, like Brian does. Okay. Laker Irish.
Question.
Yeah, that's a great question. Great question, because that actually made me think about how I watch games. Laker Irish says, could we be seeing true freshmen playing significant time by the Purdue game, or is that too early? I think it just
depends. We're going to see one for sure.
Well, yeah, and Blake Fisher. Yeah, absolutely. He'll be getting significant time. Some of the other guys who may be rotational guys, things of that nature, like would they jump into a starting role? Barring injury, probably not. But could they be in the in the rotation? Possibly. Just depends on how those first 2 games go. I mean, if the veteran guys step up, then maybe not. I mean, I don't know. I have a hard time answering this because I don't know that I'm looking for freshmen to necessarily take over a spot.
I'm going to look at it from a significant playing time standpoint, and I'm going to look at it from the standpoint of guys that are going to play as part of the rotation. So I'm going to look at it from a little different standpoint. Obviously, Blake Fisher's in there. I think within the first 3 games, I believe we're going to see Rocco Spindler get some reps, be part of maybe a rotation potentially. I think we're going to see Lorenzo Styles playing early. I think we're going to see Kane Barong playing early. We'll see about Gabriel Rubio. I think the elbow injury kind of slowed down his growth. If he didn't get injured, I'd be more confident there. But I could see Gabriel Rubio just being too good not to play early. I could. And if there's a couple other things that I'm hearing about, some moving guys around, that could open up an opportunity as well. But I think there will be a DB that will play a lot early. And my prediction is going to be Ryan Barnes. But that's just a pre-camp prediction. So I think we'll see some guys, because there's some guys that are just too good not to play. And I think we're going to see that. Now, are they going to play significant, meaning they're going to start? No, I'm not saying that. But they're going to play. And get this comment from Christopher Sally. Thanks, guys. I also joined the message board yesterday. Welcome aboard, Chris. I appreciate that very, very much. And this is actually the first show, Vince, that we haven't had somebody join the message board during the show. I'm a little sad about that. But it's all good.
I got one for you here, Brian. Mike Huff says, can you speak on why BK struggles with bad assistant coaches, Van Gorder, Joseph, and now Alexander, and it's obvious as well?
I would not put it the way that you put it.
Yeah,
Mike, and I don't mean any disrespect by this, but I think he's made some bad hires, but I think Urban Meyer's made bad hires. Nick Saban's made bad hires. Everybody makes bad hires. I don't think Terry Joseph was a bad hire. I don't think Terry Joseph coached well. I don't think Del Alexander was a bad hire. You've heard me say time and time again, I think Coach Alexander is capable of turning it around and doing a good job. I've said that before. I think Del Alexander is a good football coach. I don't think he's done a good job at Notre Dame. But that doesn't mean he's not capable of sitting down with the coaches and figuring out how can we make these changes and get better at it. Here's what you need to do. You need to do this, you need to do that, and get better at it. And so Van Gorder was a bad hire. Charlie Molnar was a bad hire. I think he made a mistake with his last offensive line hire. I do. With all due respect to Jeff Quinn, you could have had Joe Gilbert, who's now has a Super Bowl ring as the offensive line coach of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, right? That's who the players wanted. That's who should have got to the OC at the time wanted. He went in a different direction. I think that was a mistake, with all due respect. But beyond that, I don't think there's been a lot of bad hires, and I don't think he struggles to hire assistant coaches because he's made a lot of great hires too. He hired Harry Heastan. He kept Tony Alford, I think, is the only coach to hold over from that previous staff. Great hire. Brought in Mike Denbrock. Great hire. Ed Warner was a good hire to start his staff off. Ed Warner's not a great O-line coach, but he's a good O-line coach. He hired Mike Elko, and he hired Clark Lee, and he hired Marcus Freeman. He hired Chip Long, which I think was a good hire. I mean, he's made some good hires. Hired Lance Taylor.
The good ones far outweigh the bad ones. The bad ones stick out.
Bobby Elliott. Coach Elliott was a really good hire. Chuck Martin was a great hire. Kerry Cooks was a really good hire, in my opinion. So he's made far more good hires. And I would even argue he's made more great hires than he's made bad, like really bad hires. Mm-hmm. And so I look at Mike Elko and Clark Lee as part of that first staff, great hires. I look at Marcus Freeman as a great hire. I think Harry Heastan was a great hire. I think keeping Tony Alford was a great hire. I think Mike Denbrock was a great hire. Mike Denbrock was a recruiting beast at Notre Dame. There's a reason they recruited so well in the first 5 years compared to the next 5 years from a recruiting standpoint. I think there's been Mike Mickens was a great hire. There's been a lot more of those than Brian Van Gorder, Terry Joseph, again, who I'm just going to grant your premise of those guys, right? I don't think Del Alexander was a bad hire, but just granting your premise, I just doubled the number of bad hires that you mentioned. And even if you throw in Jeff Quinn, if you want to have that argument, add in Charlie Molnar, that I think was a bad hire, there's still been a lot more great hires than shaky hires. And then there's been a lot of good hires along with that aren't great, but good hires. Oh, Mike Elston. I forgot to mention Mike Elston.
You took the words right out of my mouth.
You know,
say that. Yeah.
That's turned out to be it was a good hire at first, and he's evolved into a great hire with what he's done as a recruiting coordinator, assistant head coach, D-line coach, and all those kind of things.
Well, I would throw in Matt Bayless as well.
Honestly. Agree. Yeah. Agree. And again, like you look at like Paul Longo. Paul Longo actually did a really good job when he first came to Notre Dame. Those first couple of years, Paul Longo went through some health issues, and his he didn't do as good of a job. That was on Brian Kelly not to make the move sooner.
Right.
The issue wasn't hiring Paul Longo. The issue was not making the move sooner.
Sure.
I don't even fault the Brian Van Gorder hire. I didn't like it at the time, but I didn't think he was going to be as bad as he was. The problem isn't that you hired him. Every coach makes bad hires.
Right.
The problem is that you kept him as long as you kept him.
Right.
Somebody just asked about Tommy Rees. I thought Tommy Rees was a really good hire as the quarterback's coach. I thought Tommy Rees, when they hired him as an offensive coordinator, I said it was the wrong time. And I still believe that. It was the wrong time. You should have brought in Joe Moorhead. I think Tommy could have learned a lot from him. I think Tommy needed a year or two of seasoning. But now that he's there, I support him. Somebody asked me on the message board if you could name your coaching staff that you would want, and you can have anybody in the country, who would you have? There. Yeah. And I tried to be realistic with it. I didn't say, okay, my offensive line coach is Mario Cristobal. You know, my receivers coach is Dabo. My D coordinator is Nick Saban. I tried to be realistic with it, okay? But I had Tommy on there as my OC quarterbacks coach, and somebody said, well, look, but I'm the head coach. I'm directing the offense. I can assure you we'd have RPOs and some of those things. I think Tommy's a wicked smart young coach. I just thought he needed more seasoning before you handed him the reins, but now he's going to get that seasoning, kind of a trial by fire. So, that's why I criticized him for that hire, but then I've given Coach Rees a fair evaluation ever since, and now he's getting into that territory where I said at the time, I'm cool with you bringing him in then, So I thought Joe Moorhead comes for a year or two, does a great job, and then gets a head coaching job again, and then you hand the reins over to Tommy Rees. That's what I always said. I didn't think it should have been 2020. That was my issue. But as far as quarterback coach and eventual offensive coordinator, it was a great hire.
Yeah.
You don't have the success Tommy Rees had as a quarterback at Notre Dame with his limited physical ability if you're not incredibly smart. And he gets Notre Dame. And there's been some things he's done as a coach and how he interacts with people that shows me a surprising level of maturity in that regards, which I've appreciated as well. No question.
All right. QS. He said, or she, not sure. Not necessarily an Irish fan, but I love college football and I love exploring teams' fan bases all over the nation. Welcome, QS. Those are the kind of guys that we like to have in here, or gals. People. Those are the kind of people we like to have in here. It makes things exciting for sure.
You really tried to walk back that guy's comment, didn't you? It's all good, man.
You just never know. You never know what's going to make somebody upset, man.
Yeah,
I call girls guys all the time. Like, hey, come on, guy.
Yeah. When I say guys, it's a technical term. Like, yes. When you know what the weirdest one was though? So I say y'all a lot, being from Virginia or kind of growing up in Virginia. But when I lived in Pittsburgh, they said yins. It was yins. Really? Yins guys going to the movies tonight.
I'm like, never heard that.
What did you just call me? Am I going to have to slap you? Did you just, what's a yin? And I don't think I'm going to like it. But yeah, yins. What are yins doing? Like, I don't know what you're talking about. Is that English? Yeah. Great. I have a buddy from Pittsburgh who still talks like that. He watches the show a lot, so I'll have to bust his chops about it. But yeah.
All right, I'm gonna put this one up by QS because they're new in here. But obviously this could be, a soliloquy. But it says, what is the overall change you expect for the Irish from last year to this year? Overall improvement, disimprovement, or improvement in specific areas?
I think just kind of big picture, I think the offense is going to be better this year. I think it's going to be more explosive. It's going to be more perimeter oriented. I believe defensively, we're going to see a more aggressive defense. The disimprovement, obviously, you're going to be a lot less experienced in some key places. Quarterback, you've got a guy that's got a season of experience, but not as much experience as Ian Book had. You've got 4 new starting offensive linemen. Even a guy that has a lot of starts, Cade Madden, never played at Notre Dame, so that's kind of new. You have a lot of guys that have to step up and improve. And those are areas that I want to see them get better. But I think overall the talent level is going to be better. It's just going to be about can the talent turn into production is going to be a big key. But I actually think this is going to be a better Notre Dame team than it was last year.
I agree.
Record may not reflect it per se because it's a much tougher schedule, but I think their record's going to be just as good, if not better, than it was last year.
Matt Romero, Tosh Baker looks really skinny in recent pictures. Is he deceiving or just not taking advantage of his Jets or Mission Barbecue deals?
Well, I think he got a little bit – I don't think he's skinny. He's just really big.
Yeah.
He's long. So that weight is distributed over a much bigger 6'8", longer framed guy. I think Tosh also put on some bad weight in the upper body in an attempt to get to a certain weight. And I think they're working some of that off. But the other thing too is guys are always going to look skinnier in shirts and shorts than the 6'7", 6'8" guys are always going to look a little skinnier in shorts than a 6'3" guy who's more wide.
Right.
It's just kind of how it goes.
Riley Gerard says, does Notre Dame ever recruit around the area? I'm assuming he means the local area. They pay attention to what's going on. The problem is this area isn't great for football. I mean, it's okay, and there have been guys who have done well.
Paul
beyond. Paul Mawala is on the current
Braxton
team.
Cave.
Yep. Yeah. Those are guys that are recent. There's a couple of walk-ons, I believe, that are from the area. Obviously, Connor Radigan, who has that podcast. He's Dr. Radigan's son. He's local. Went to St. Joe High School. There's a kid who was the quarterback at New Prairie locally. He was a preferred walk-on Notre Dame. He's got like a number in like the 30s, but he's listed as a quarterback. As one of those.
Come on, Chase Ketterer.
Yes, thank you.
He's playing running back now.
Is he playing running back now? I thought he was still listed as a quarterback, but he's still listed as a quarterback, I believe. Yeah. Okay,
but he was playing running back in the spring.
Gotcha. Yeah, no, he's they ran an option offense that was like the 3-inch splits. 9 guys on the line, quarterback and running back. That's the offense that they ran, and he ran for buckets of yards.
He's that good kind of walk on that you're like, that kid could help him someday.
Yeah, absolutely.
As a special teams rotation.
He's a special teams player. He's going to do a heck of a job on the scout team, on the look team, He's a smart kid, obviously, got in Notre Dame. So
I personally would count Fort Wayne as this area as well, and that's where they've had a lot more success.
A hotbed. That's a hotbed. I agree with that.
I mean, Jalen Smith, Tyler Eifert, Drew Tranquil, but good South ball. Bend specifically area, not as much.
Yeah, that's a good call.
They would love to do it if there was a guy from here that they thought could play there. They'd certainly take him, but
right.
And they got a commitment from another guy from Washington, David Perkins, which never made sense to me. He was never going to make it at Notre Dame.
Not in a bajillion, not from an academic standpoint, not from a personality standpoint.
Way, shape, form, or fashion. None. I thought they should have recruited Garrett Dieter. That's one guy I thought that they should. I kind of understand why they didn't.
I'll disagree with that.
I thought Garrett could play here. I could. The guy's been in the NFL for how many years? He played for Alabama on a team that won a national title, Vince. I think he could play at Notre Dame. He's also in the National Football League. Personally, I understand where you're coming from, but I'm just talking about the kid as a football player. He's a really good football player.
Yeah.
And if you can start at Alabama for a team that wins a national championship, I think you could play at Notre Dame.
I get that. He went to 3 colleges. You know what I mean?
I get all that.
But anyway.
But that's not about talent. That's because he was using each of those colleges to eventually get to a place like Alabama.
Level. Yes and no.
The problem was,
on that.
Again, if you can play at Alabama and if you can play in the NFL, he has a Super Bowl ring.
He does have a Super Bowl ring.
You can play at Notre Dame. Again, I'm not saying he would have been Michael Floyd. The mistake that Garrett made is he kept using these schools as stepping stones to the next to try to get back to a place that he thought he should have been in the first place. Which is why he went to Bama. I mean, he went to Bama as a grad transfer. He should have gone to Bowling Green right away. That's what he should have done. And he'd have had a much different career. He went to SMU for one reason only. A receivers coach who they said they were going to get him the ball a ton. And that, to me, that was a mistake. I think he's a guy that if he would have made maybe a more sound decision right away, gone to a MAC level school, and he'd have put up big numbers. And then he would have still gone to a place like Alabama. He was always going to do that. I mean, when the opportunity came for him to go to a Power 5 school, he was always going to do that. That was never in doubt. He was always going to do that. And I understand where you're coming from because it's not just about the talent, but the fact is
it's personal for me. Like I have a hard time separating the two. I'll be honest with that. I'll be completely. I coached against the kid and his family, et cetera. And
sure, but as a football player, I mean, at Bowling Green, he had 94 catches for over 1,000 yards, and Alabama thought he was good enough to come play for them. And he was the guy that started on their national title team, and the Kansas City Chiefs felt he's good enough to pay him for the last, 3 seasons? I thought they lost
the national title game that he played in.
2016?
That's the case. I'm almost positive they lost the game that he was in.
Yeah, that's right. They lost to Alabama or Clemson that year.
Right.
That's the year he lost to Clemson.
But it's a moot point. I mean, he played in the national championship game.
Right. For a team that was 14-0 going into that game.
I totally understand that.
Caught a touchdown in the SEC championship game that year too. So yeah, he could have played at Notre Dame. But I understand where you're coming from.
Right. It's all good. I got to let it go.
Yes, you do. Okay. And I know where you're coming from. I'm just trying to make it about football.
I need to grow up.
All the other stuff.
I need to grow up. That's all there is to it. I need to let it go. Yes. All right. Delusional Jack Cohn fan. Great name, by the way. He goes, did y'all take my Jack Cohn for Heisman comment? Quit hating. We probably missed it, but I think that's awesome. That's why I put that up there.
He basically said Jack Cohn's going to throw for 1,000 yards in the first 3 games.
Oh,
but again, by the time we got to questions, that had long been since booted.
So exactly.
That's why we didn't get to it.
And then Connor says, any news from the quarterback room? Nothing.
No.
The answer is no.
I mean, news other than just, everything's what we expected to be. Jack Cohn looking good, and Drew Pine's looking good, and Tyler Buckner's, no one's hurt. I mean, that's all the news you're ever going to get right about now. It's all going to be like what happens in fall camp, but nothing unexpected.
Justin Knox question, and this would have been a really good question about a month ago.
Mm-hmm.
Over under on non-center snaps for Jarrett Patterson this season.
I'm going to go 100. I'm going to set it at 100. And then you're going to pick a. That's 2 games. That's
true.
A game and a half. So basically, what I'm envisioning is there's an injury, and they feel that the best thing to do is to move him to guard or tackle, and because again, what if one of the tackles goes down? Your question for Notre Dame is: do you move another guard, Quinn Carroll, Andrew Kristofic out to tackle? Or let's say Tosh Baker's not ready, or do you say we're going to put Jarrett Patterson out there and then put Zeke Rhodes out? I'm looking at a situation like last year. If something like last year happens,
right,
would he play other spots? So that's a game and a half. So game and a half, 100 snaps is a game and a half, essentially, right? So then that's where I'm at. So it would be something like that. I'd still take the under. I think he's going to play center all year. But I think that's where I would set it, because it would be, if he's going to not play center, it would be something like that. That something bad happens injury-wise, and they have to move some things around, which could happen. I mean, Josh Lugg's a guy that struggled to stay healthy. I mean, there's
with the injuries that they've had. Yeah, I'll take the over, because I think that's a legitimate possibility. So I'll take the over. You convinced me. All right,
I try.
Ladarius, how many commitments can Notre Dame have in this class? I think that's a really good question.
Still to be determined. 25 to 27 is kind of the number they're shooting for. They're at 19 right now.
19.
So.
Thank you. That was going to be my follow-up. A lot of people talking about Mississippi State and what they were able to do.
Yeah, Dan Mullen did some really good things in Mississippi State.
And then there you go. Delusional Jack Cohn fan. Jack Cohn will put up 1,000 combined yards on Toledo and Purdue. So after 2 games, 1,000 yards.
Okay,
that's
so
a lot.
he got a little. At first, it was.
And
so
3.
this is a new comment. The first was the first 3 games. So now
this one was a new one.
He's really truly being delusional. So I mean, even if Jack Cohn's playing like a Heisman Trophy winner, he's not going to play enough to put up 1,000 yards in those 2 games.
Right.
We're going to pull him in the third quarter with 400 passing yards. You know what I mean? Like,
right.
He's not getting to 1,000 yards. Be nice if he did.
Sure.
Make me look really good. I'd be happy about
it. John Rich says, okay, I'll play Jeopardy and make my post in the form of a question. How much of a long-term concern will missed tackles and DBs grabbing be in the early games?
I'm going to go with not much for 100, John. I don't think that's going to be an issue, honestly. I think their tackling improved a little bit last year, but I think the problem that they had last year is they had guys on the field that just shouldn't have been on the field. They just weren't good enough to be on the field. I don't think that's going to be the issue this year. So I don't think it's going to be as much of an issue. And I also think too, the forcing more bounce is going to also allow them to rally to the ball a little bit more effectively. So it'll be an issue a little bit early, but not much of one. Not much of one. If you disagree with that, Vince, you can.
No,
because it definitely was an issue last year, but I think it was more of, number one, your best player had some missed tackles because he just at times freelance a little bit. It's just going to happen. I'll take that and that's not a criticism, because I'll accept that for the plays he made that were off script. It's kind of like a quarterback that throws a couple more picks than you like. I can live with that because he's going to make 10 plays that I love, and that's where I'm at.
QS says, I hate it when I can call plays that are going to happen. Predictable teams lose in the long run. Used to be a Husker fan because I live in Nebraska, and they're the most predictable team, and they always choke.
Yeah, if we're sitting there on TV and we're like, okay, here comes outside zone
that's happened.
Here's the funny thing is, I've had people say, well, I called 8 straight plays for Notre Dame. Okay, what'd you call? Well, I knew they're going to run it here, and they're going to pass. That's not calling a play. Right. Got a 50-50 shot of getting that right. You know what I mean?
Right.
What if you're calling plays like, I think they're going to run outside zone to the tight end side here, then that's predicting it, right? If you're saying like, I think they're going to run smash here, they're going to run 4 verts here, then to me that's calling the plays. But if you're just calling run pass, again, on every snap you have a 50-50 shot of getting that right. No, I'd say it's a little bit. They're going to run it here. Okay. They have like 12 different run plays. So, but I do think at times Notre Dame last year got a little bit predictable, but
yeah,
predictable meaning run pass, but not necessarily predictable on where the run was going to go or where the pass was going to go.
Let's see. OC Irish fam, observation from more of a fan point of view. Does the offense run a number of specific plays in order to set up the defense for a home run play? Excuse me. At times.
And it's more about you're running a play that you think will work. But so like, here's an example. Okay. So I'm facing a 2-high team. I'm going to run a certain look because I want to attack the high-low, right? So I really think that I can attack. I'm in a trips look. I have a tight end, 2 receivers to that side. I'm going to run the tight end on the 15-yard in cut, bring that number 2 receiver on a stutter in because I really want to ISO those linebackers. And then I'm going to run like a comeback backside if I get a one-on-one. I'm not really looking at that outside guy, right, on this particular call, but I'm going to tag him on a post route because I want to see how that deep safety handles that high-low. And if that safety is just looking dead inside at numbers 2 and 3, and he's just not looking at number 1, then now I know I can come back to that number 1 concept for a different route later. I can tag that like on a go, or I can tag it on a post route or something like that because I think he can win that matchup. But you're not just wasting a play. And this isn't what Vince and I mean, and I'm not saying you mean it, but you're not wasting a play like, hey, I want to do this because I want to set it up for a home run. You're doing certain things within your calls that you think will work to see how the defense reacts to certain routes and stuff that maybe are your third or fourth option. And then if you like it, you come back to it. So, when Notre Dame ran that play we talked about to Georgia Tech, they wanted to run the outside zone. They thought the outside zone would work, but they just ran the smoke to see, how they would respond to it. Well, when they responded the way they wanted, they went right back to the reverse next play, and Chris Tyree runs for 20 yards. So it wasn't like a wasted play, but it was something built into the call that wasn't necessarily going to impact the actual play that then maybe set up something later.
And that's the job of one of the guys up in the booth to keep an eye on.
And it's part of the game plan too. Hey, when we run such and such out of trips, I want you to see how that field safety is reacting to that play.
Exactly.
And it's part of your weekly game plan because then you know, okay, if he does this, we're coming back with this. If he does that, we're coming back with that.
So inadvertently, yes, you do set yourself up for a home run play in general because you see how guys react to other things.
But you're not running 5 plays with the sole purpose of setting up a run play, this home run play. It's not quite like that.
Right. Yep. Very good. Great name. Troy Kozlowski, the Clevelander till my dying day. He says, all I got to say as a diehard Browns fan, thank you for JOK.
You're welcome.
You're welcome.
Thank Mike Elko and Clark Lee for that one.
Yeah, exactly. Absolutely. Matt Romero has a great one. He says, guys, if you could listen to 2 guys call Notre Dame games for the rest of your lives, who you got?
It's easy for me. Who you got, Vince?
I couldn't come up with a second guy because I don't really care about the color guy. Anybody can do color because I do color. Color can be done by just about anybody, but play-by-play is an art. Mm-hmm. And for me, it's all day, every day, Tony Roberts.
So having listened to Doug Flutie for the last several years, not anyone can do color.
Okay, fair enough.
For me, okay, Tony Roberts all time, but like right now, still active. I would no. Your answer's fine, Vince. You can answer it however you want. I'm just saying this is my criteria. Okay,
gotcha.
I love Tony Roberts, and when Loose Emoji told me once that Tony Roberts listen to me on the podcast, I'd say I want to do.
I'd be done, man.
Tell him I said thanks.
I would be done. I would be melted. Done.
Made my life. But just guys that are kind of doing stuff now. See, Tony to me was a radio guy. He was so good at just making a game I couldn't see. Man.
Yes.
Right? But for TV, there's a lot of people going to hate this answer. Gus Johnson's my play-by-play guy. Mike Mayock's doing color. That's my 2. You got the most exciting play-by-play guy in the game with the guy that I thought was a brilliant technical analyst. Now, I understand why a lot of people who didn't coach or play didn't like Mike Mayock, but for me, he was brilliant. He was awesome.
I love listening to him. Yeah.
Awesome.
I would love to see him paired up with Tony Roberts. There you go.
And that's why I like him and Joel Klatt together. Like, I don't particularly care much for Joel Klatt's, although he's kind of given me some stuff that I've liked recently, but he has a lot of bad takes, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Joel Klatt, on Twitter or on a Colin Cowherd. But when he's doing a play-by-play, he's really good. Or color, he's really good. So that's that would be but that's why I like that duo. But for me, I'd still like to see Mayock. But of course, Mayock's not going to leave the GM of the Raiders to do that. So if I had to pick a crew that's doing it now, honestly, I would like to see Gus Johnson and Brady Quinn.
Yeah.
Honestly.
I think Quinn's actually really good. And then not just because I'm being a homer.
He's gotten way better. He is really good. I remember the first year he was doing it, I was like, it's rough. It would be for me.
It's not easy.
Well, you said anyone can do it.
Well, I mean,
Vince. I know. I knew what you meant.
If you know football and you have a relationship with the guy that you're doing it with, I think that's really, really important because you have to know when the other guy wants you to talk.
That's what made Pat Summerall and John Madden so good.
Yes, because they were in each other's heads.
Yeah,
and I think that's so important. The team aspect is so important.
And also partly why, it's partly why I like Joel Klatt and Gus Johnson. But Yeah, I think Brady Quinn and Gus Johnson will be. And Brady's he's gotten, like you said, he's really good now, I think. But that would be the two that I would like to see together.
Yeah, there was a lot of people love Mike Mayock on here.
I did, yeah, I did too.
Yeah.
I never understood why they're like, yeah, I thought Mike Mayock was awesome.
Let's see here. So he says, what about Tommy Rees? He's got a job. He's busy.
No, that question was about, that came up when we were talking about the hires.
Oh,
he posted that when we were talking about good or bad hires.
Gotcha. Okay. It came at the tail end of everybody talking about who they wanted in the booth. So, Michael Morris says, Vince, it's been a pleasure to see you grow into a respected Notre Dame football analyst at IB. I want you to know how proud I am of you. Keep up the good work. Wow.
You're a little dusty in there.
I know, right? Like, thanks, Michael. That was really kind. Don't usually get emotional. Verklempt. All right. Let's see.
D-Rock's got a good question a couple spots down from that, Vince.
Oh, I see it. Yep.
He says, notice Notre Dame's schedule has 3 away games, Virginia Tech, Virginia, Stanford, that do not have a kickoff time or TV coverage listed at this time. Will this info get locked in before the season starts? No, it will not. Nope. So the reason for that, D-Rock, is those are games that are going to be on ESPN or ABC. And usually those games get locked in a couple weeks before, meaning if Virginia Tech's like 4-1 and Notre Dame's like 5-0 or 4-0, that game's going to be 8 o'clock. Or if just Notre Dame's really good, Virginia Tech could be 2-6,
true,
or whatever. And if Notre Dame's really good, that's going to be probably an 8 o'clock game. If Notre Dame's 3-2, then that may be a noon game, and then it'll determine whether it's going to be ESPN or ABC. So those games, because again, ACC and Pac-12, the Stanford game will be a Fox game. And it'll just determine whether it's going to be the noon, the 3:30 Fox game or the 3 o'clock Fox. I forget what their mid-afternoon slot is, or if it's a night game. So it's the first two are ESPN with the ACC, and because they're road games at those places, they'll be determined.
Was Stanford a Fox thing now? I thought they were with ESPN.
Pac-12, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, because the game 2 years ago was on Fox. Now ESPN also carries Pac-12 games, but it's kind of like this. It's like the Big 12 is partly with ESPN and partly with the Fox. So Fox gets kind of like that game of the week kind of thing, sort of like what the CBS. Because like ESPN always carried a bunch of SEC games, but then CBS always had dibs on. They could pick the one game that they always wanted. CBS didn't carry 3 SEC games a day. And so that's kind of how it is too. But that game a lot of times will be on Fox. Okay. The Stanford Notre Dame game's been on Fox a lot when they play out in
really?
California.
Wow, missed that completely.
Yeah.
All right.
Because remember, Gus Johnson did the 2015 game. Remember him calling that Josh Adams counter run?
That's right.
That made that game fun because that was an exciting game. And Notre Dame had Will Fuller had a long touchdown. Josh Adams had a long touchdown run, and that was C.J. Sanders had the kick return for a touchdown. Yeah, so that game was on Fox too. The 2013 game was on Fox. So, yeah, a lot of those games have been on Fox.
Okay. Brian Meadows says, I think if Brian Kelly wins the national championship, he's going to have the fever and won't retire. I'm good with it if he doesn't. He's worked hard to leave after one.
Yeah, I'm good either way. I mean, look, if you wins a title, you have the right to do whatever the heck you want.
Sure.
If you want to leave right away, hey, tip my cap to him. Great job. You won a title. You're going to, let's figure out, make sure we get somebody good to do the mold for the statue. Right.
Right. Yeah. Right.
If he decides he still wants to keep coaching because he's still got that fever, that bug or whatever you want to do, then keep coaching. But, do whatever you want. You win a title. You can do whatever the heck you want. Whatever.
Chad Williams, this is a bit of a misconception. I wanted you to talk about it. In theory, he says every offensive play is meant to go for 6.
Does he have a follow-up to that? Because you got the ...
No, I think he was just talking about nope, sure doesn't.
I mean, in very general terms, you could say yes. I mean, you could say you'd like to score on every play, but no, not every play is meant to go for 6, which is why if every play was meant to go for 6, then every time you don't score, you check it down as a minus. Well, why is it a minus? We gained 7 yards. No, every play is meant to hit your efficiency number. So every time you run the football, you want to run at least X amount of yards. And it could be different for different plays. If I'm averaging the same number of yards per attempt on outside zone as I am inside zone, either we're freaking great at running inside zone or we're not good at running outside zone. One of those two things is going to be true because some plays are meant to design more. For example, if I'm running, on post routes, we're averaging X number of yards per attempt. and X number of yards per completion, it's not going to look anything like what we're running on hitch routes, right? You're not running a hitch designed to score. Okay, here's the play call. I want you to catch a hitch route at 5 yards, make 13 people miss, and then go score. Right? You know what I mean? Like I'm being hyperbolic because it could be as simple as you make it one guy miss and you go score. I'm just making the point that not every play is meant to score. Now, because the other thing too is if every play is executed perfectly, in most instances, they have 11 dudes against your 10. There's always somebody you can't account for, in theory. Now, if you've got a mobile quarterback, you can kind of somewhat negate that kind of thing, whatever. But no, not every play is meant. Now, you're trying to disrupt guys and all that kind of stuff. But it's not. You'd have to get real broad with the sense of every play is meant to score in that sense, because sometimes you're setting things up for other things. That are scores. You're doing other things to set up a chance to score. Hey, we get into 2nd and 2. That's our take a shot play. Yes, those are you're trying to score, but you're not necessarily trying to score on.
Yeah, I think
by running counter at your own 20 on 1st and 10.
Right. I think a lot of like if you draw the X's and O's on a piece of paper, most run game plays, it looks like everybody's taken care of, and yes, it would go for a score, but that's not. Yeah. A lot of times, I used to tell my players, like when we would draw up a run games, like, look, we've got the front guys taken care of. I expect my running back to make the secondary guy miss. Like he's not accounted for. He's accounted for with the back, right? And so not all guys are necessarily accounted for, which is why I wanted to throw that out there.
Yeah, but but you always have one guy that's not accounting for a block at quarterback too. I mean, so it just depends on are you running read zone and all that kind of stuff. So
yeah, right. A lot of suggestions for who people would like to hear in the booth, and that pretty much takes us down to the end. So unless you're seeing something that I'm not seeing, sir,
you at 410?
I am 410.
Let's see here.
Somebody wants Betty White, which
okay.
Or James Earl
Mike
Jones.
Huff says this: most plays are meant to stay ahead of the chains. I would much more so agree with that.
Yeah, agree.
Meaning, most plays are designed to stay on schedule. I wouldn't say ahead of the chains. That's a different way. It's just different terminology. But that's Mike. I'm with Mike on that. Like, you have a goal for what you want to be on first down. You have a goal for how you want to be on 2nd and 3rd down. Now, if you can make somebody miss, if you have a game record, then yes. And there are play calls that you design to be a home run. Like if the safety does this, we're going for 6 on this play. You do that all the time as a play caller, but not every. If you start doing that on every play, you're gonna have a lot of zeros and minuses. That's the other thing. And so I think Mike's is there because if you stay on schedule, you stay ahead of the chains. That just means, you're in 2nd downs, you're in 3rd and short, you're in let's move the chain situations. And what that also means is when you're staying ahead of the chains, to Mike's, the way that I believe Mike means it is, you're always in a situation where you got everything on the table. If you're in 3rd and 9, you don't have everything on the table. If you're in 2nd and 9, you don't necessarily have everything on the table. If you're in 2nd and 1, 2nd and 2, everything is on the table. And that's what, if you're in 3rd and 1 or 3rd and 2, you have a lot on the table there. So I think those are the things that that I would say that I'm a lot more with Mike on this one, as far as I think what most offensive play calls. Now everything has a chance. If we can make a guy miss, then it could be 6, but you're not designing inside zone out of 13 personnel to go for 80. Usually. If it does, it just means you got really good players, but this is necessarily designed it to be that.
Yeah, Chad says, I agree with you now. My take was more from the 70s and 80s that type of verbiage was not used 30 or 40 years ago.
Gotcha.
So anyway, this is an interesting one. Shannon says, Brian and Vince, what are your thoughts on targeting? I just think it's a horrible penalty in college football, and it's always misinterpreted. Would you guys abolish it or just revamp the rule?
You want to take a first shot at that, Vince? Because I think we're on the same page here.
The problem with targeting is bad, right? I mean, if you're going to spear somebody, like spearing, like that kind of a thing, bad. Hitting a defenseless player, bad, right? Now, that made for good highlights and thing. I get all of that. It's a contact sport. I do feel like there should be a penalty, but the way that they call it now just leaves so much to the opinion of the referee that I don't like it. I would rather have them not call it than do it the way they're doing it, because I think guys are getting kicked out of games that should not have been kicked out of games.
Yeah.
And on video replay, you're telling me that you can tell what the intent of the defender is, and that no, you can't.
You rarely.
I'm sorry.
Rarely.
Yeah. Fair enough.
A guy throws, and I know what you mean, Vince, because we've had this conversation. That's why I'm adding to, because we've talked. If a guy throws a forearm shiver to a guy, that was a cheap hit. You're gone. Right. I mean, it's kind of like in basketball. There's times when a guy just drags a guy, just throws him down. That's a kick him out, right?
Flagrant.
Right. Yes. But continue, Vince. I just wanted to kind of point out.
No. I'm with you. I don't know that I have an answer off the top of my head as to how to improve it. But if you have it, I would love to hear it.
So here's the deal. If it's a blatantly dirty hit and you know it when you see it, right? Quarterback's on the ground, you come in late, you put your head down and you spear him in the back of the head, you're gone, right? I think targeting it's kind of like a lot of things, good intentions end up with bad results. To me, targeting is a good idea. I think one of the benefits of targeting is it's forced football coaches to rethink how they teach tackling.
Sure.
And we've gotten rid of a lot of the hit with your face stuff that I didn't like, right? Because I remember the first time I was taught that, it was in high school, because I was moving to play defense, and the guy was like, you square gut and hit him right. And I'm like, I'm not doing that. I'm going for the knees. You crazy? Like, I'm a quarterback, But the point being, it's forced us to rethink how do we teach tackling to avoid the rule, which in theory, when coached appropriately, is, I think, good for player safety. But at the same time, I think it's gotten to the degree of you can't ever hit a guy's head, but a running back can put his crown down and go right through your chest with the crown of his helmet, and it's not a penalty. Offensive linemen target each other and defensive linemen target each other on every single play.
Yes.
Right. So we're being a bit silly with this targeting thing, and it's the defensive nature. I'm different on than like you're tackling a running back who's
right.
It's like if a running back puts his shoulder down and I put my shoulder down and our heads meet, that shouldn't even be a penalty, much less an ejection from the game. If a receiver's coming down and you come across and you put your face mask right and you just knock his head off, that should be a penalty. So I'm good with the targeting rule. I would nuance it a little bit to certain specific situations. A guy sliding, a guy that's on the ground, a receiver because running backs are rarely defenseless. Receivers are defenseless all the time. So I do think there's a need for it. But what I would do is I would make it just like personal fouls. First one's a 15-yard penalty. Second one's an ejection.
Fair enough. Yeah.
I mean, that's what the rule. That's been around for a while.
And I wouldn't go to replay on it. I'm sorry.
What I would do with replay. Here's what I would do with replay.
Okay.
The penalty's called. It's a penalty. It's 15-yard penalty. It's targeting, 15-yard penalty. It's on your check. During that series, they can go back and review it and say, "Hey, that wasn't targeting." So the check is taken off your resume, right? Okay. So if it's not targeting, and again, it's not stopping play. It's something that you have someone that's looking at. So hey, the play's going on, and you have a third guy. I mean, you have three people in the booth,
right?
As the next play's going on, that guy can be looking at it, deciding if it was a targeting, and then by the next series, you can. Now, if a guy gets targeting for 2 penalties in a row and you kick him out of the game, I do like the rule of not. Then you go back and say we're going to take one of those away. You can put him back in.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, so just in that rare instance that never happens of a guy, gets it twice in a row. But I would say it's a penalty the first time, you get kicked out the second time. The only time the review is coming into play is they will evaluate it and they can take it away.
Yeah.
Or
I like that.
it can just be a personal foul that they don't call targeting, and then it's defenseless player. But then they look at it like, yeah, that was targeting. We're going to add that to your check. I don't love that idea because then you have to inform coaches.
Right.
But I would make it like that to where it's a 15-yard penalty first time, second time you're out.
I just feel like right now,
go back and look at it.
Flags are just being thrown for
if you're anywhere near the head, and then they review it and they make the worst calls with it. It's like how was Kyle Hamilton kicked out for what he did, and Stephon Tuitt was kicked out for what he did, but the dude from Texas wasn't kicked out for what he did to Torrey Hunter.
Exactly.
That is to me the epitome of why that rule was in tar. A defensive player in any zone who gets his head just destroyed, right? Like that if that's not if that's not targeting, then they should never ever call targeting ever.
Exactly. And the fact that they reviewed it and said it wasn't targeting was just unbelievable.
Right.
I mean, I remember watching that. I was at a friend's house. I'm watching that game because it was an away game. It was first game of the season, right? And we were actually coupled it around our coaches meeting. And so we're watching that game, and I'm like, that's targeting. I'm like sitting back. I'm not even paying that much attention. And then all of a sudden they're like, no, that's not targeting. What?
Yes.
Like,
it's
are you
horrible.
Kidding me? Just one of the worst calls in Notre Dame history. I'm telling you.
They have no clue how to call it. And here's the thing. It impacts games.
Yes, absolutely.
You know, Kyle Hamilton gets kicked out of the game. Thank goodness that it didn't impact that game. But I mean, it could have. It may the next time.
Oh,
you know, and so those are the things you look at and say, like you know, a game that it did impact, Pitt in 2013. If Stephon Tuitt doesn't get kicked out of that game, Notre Dame wins that game. Now all of a sudden that 9-4 2013 team is 10-3.
Yeah.
And, you know, maybe we're having you went 12-1 last year. You're 10-3 this year. Maybe that has an impact on some certain things. Sure. So those things matter. And you can't afford to have so much human error having that drastic of a consequence. Referees are going to make mistakes all the time. Replay booth guys are going to make mistakes all the time. By making the second one be the kick you out one, it lessens the impact of them making those bad calls.
Absolutely. It's like a guy playing with 4 fouls. Like, you know, you're going to be a little bit more careful, obviously, but you're still in the game. You're still making an impact. Like, that's my issue.
But see, I can live with that because you're going to have a bad holding call. You call holding, it really wasn't holding, or you call pass interference, it really wasn't pass interference.
Right.
You're not kicking that guy out of the game for committing pass interference when he didn't really commit pass interference. And so I'm okay. I can accept that referees are going to make mistakes, just like coaches are going to make bad calls and players are going to execute poorly. But when your mistake results in the outcome of the game just be completely being changed because of interpretation, not a clearly defined rule, then I mean, it's impossible to completely remove helmet-to-helmet contact in football. It's just impossible.
Right, exactly. There's a reason you wear a helmet in the first place. I mean, you know. Okay, there's a couple more here that I definitely want to get to.
Corey really wants to get his Jeff Brom comment in there.
And he will. It's just not – I'm not there yet.
He repeated it again.
Oh,
I didn't see it the first time. He had that earlier.
And
we didn't see it, and he just put it in there again.
I did not see it earlier. Okay. It might have been one of the ones that we got bumped on. But anyway, Michael Moore says, how important is the scout team in games like Purdue when we're big favorites? Scout team's important for every week.
Always.
Every week, regardless of who you're playing, because you need to see what's happening. I mean, if you don't see it, you're going to be lost in the game. I mean, scout team's incredibly important.
I do think that even those weeks when you're not playing a good team, I really hope that our scout team brought it those weeks. I would I would really get on the scout team coaches and say, hey, look, this week you better bring. And there'd be sometimes, honestly, in game weeks like this, I'd take over scout team because I didn't think the GAs were doing. I mean, because we got D3 GAs, right, which a lot of times weren't. You know, so I'd say
high school.
I'd just go there and take it over. But the reason I say that is in games like Purdue where you're supposed to win big, you need to make sure that your boys are. I mean, I would always kind of have this thing, and I learned this from Lou Holtz reading his book and stories about him. Is like, you know, players would say, "Man, Navy week was miserable, Rice week was miserable."
Right.
Because, I mean, they were just on us. But then Miami week, it's like, hey, here we go. Let's go. Let's roll. And they weren't nearly – because then it was like, hey, because we already had the motivation. They didn't need to motivate us Miami week. With all due respect, you just need to motivate guys on – like, I remember there was a game – it's kind of funny how this thing's happened, but we were playing Averett College in 2004, and they stunk. They were kind of a relatively new program. They were kind of coming along, but we knew we were going to smack them. And we had the worst week of practice. I mean, our guys just were not focused. And I was nervous about that game because I thought they were good enough to give us a game. Well, we got lucky that week because their starting middle linebacker before the game came to midfield and starts yelling at our players. So, like, we're overlooking this team. We're not focused. Not
anymore.
We just blasted them.
Not anymore.
But it's like, but the point is that week of practice, it was hard to get them locked in because they knew – I could say, if you don't do this, you're going to get beat. And they're not idiots. They watch film. They know this team is not going to beat us.
Right.
Like, we have to turn the ball over 6 times for this team to beat us.
Right.
And it can be hard to get young people to focus when that's true. Again, you can say all you want that they're good. So what do? I'm going to be your opponent this week, right? Because I'm going to be on you every freaking day.
Yep.
I'm going to be riding you. Nothing's going to be good enough. But then when you get to the big game week, it's like, okay, you know what's going on. If I have to motivate you this week, then I'm finding somebody else. Right. So then you just focus on ball. But there are weeks you got to play those head games because you can't allow them to kind of have those up and downs. You got to figure out a way to get them motivated and focused. And if your motivation and focus is, man, Coach Driscoll's all over me this week. Nice. Okay, then go out and do what you have to do, and I won't be on you. Right. And so I become the opponent, essentially. I can't use this team that's 0-7 as a motivation to get this guy locked in. His motivation needs to be that I'm not going to just destroy him for everything he doesn't do right. So that's where I'm at.
All right, here we go. Corey, Brian, you talk highly of Jeff Brom insofar as that he's on your short list of the next Notre Dame coaches. That said, I respect your analysis greatly, but if Brom is the next head coach, I would be depressed.
I get that based on right now. I mean, Notre Dame's not going to hire a guy that's gone 6-12 the last 2 years. Jeff Brom's not on my short list right now because he's gone 6-12 the last 2 years. But I don't think Jeff Brom has to go 10-2 to be good enough to be at a place like Notre Dame. I think he just has to be an 8-9 win coach. But I wouldn't be depressed because a decision made by a sports program should never make you depressed. But I would also say that talk to me and I'll explain to you why he's been good. But look, the reality is when I was on the Jeff Brom bandwagon, it was, you look at what he was doing in 2 years of Purdue, he was taking a team that was capable of winning 5 games and he was winning 13 with them. You know what I mean? That's great coaching. And, Lou Samoji used to point this out all the time. You can say what you want about this coach came from this school or that school. Eric Parsegian came to Notre Dame from Northwestern where he was like, one game over 500, right at 500 at Northwestern. But the point Lou used to make was going 500 at Northwestern was a tremendous accomplishment back then. Like you couldn't win there. It's kind of like Dan Mullen winning in the SEC at Mississippi State. Nobody else has ever done that before.
Right.
You look at what Brian Kelly in 3 years at Cincinnati had 3 10-plus win seasons. Okay, it's Cincinnati. But you go back and look at the 100 years before that, I think Cincinnati had 2 10-plus win seasons. Now, part of that's just, is they only played 8-9 games in the first 40 years of their history, right?
Sure.
But you look at when 10 games was an option, they had like 1 or 2 10-win seasons in like 40 years. He did it on all 3. You have to look at that in context and say, wow, he's doing something at a place that's not used to doing that. And that's kind of what made me so high on Jeff Brom. And he's an offensive genius. But being the head coach isn't just about calling plays. It's about getting your team ready to be prepared every week. It's about making good hires. It's about making sure your strength program is where it's needed to be. And the simple fact is, the last 2 years, Jeff Brom has not done a good enough job with those parts of his game. Hiring the right O-line coaches, hiring the right D coordinator, making sure the strength program is good to where you're not having all these injuries. Recruiting-wise, he's been really good. Scheme-wise, as good as there is in the game. But there's a lot more that goes to being a head coach that Brian Kelly has been doing better at recently that are going to determine whether or not a head coach is successful. Because, David Knight makes a comment of having talent to work with will help Jeff Brom, but it's all the other decisions that you have to make to ensure that you then start getting the talent. And I think that, and then that you're maximizing that talent. And I think that's where Coach Brom has fallen short. But honestly, I'll be honest, it's not going to take a 10-2 season for me to get back on the Jeff Brom bandwagon. It's just going to come down to the hires he made have worked out. The team is playing better all around football, and they're winning football games and getting the most out of his players. Sometimes that's going to look like 8-4. Sometimes that's going to look like 12-0. It just depends on the program.
Emma jumping in says, big wide receiver week. Really pumped. Fingers crossed.
Yeah, huge.
It's huge. Top 2 players on the wide receiver board for Notre Dame are making their decision. So absolutely huge. So I'll cross them with you. Fingers crossed. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I'll see where you go on this one. What are the worst calls you have seen or heard against Notre Dame? Mine's USC, where Sam Cunningham drove into the end zone without the football for the winning touchdown. Mine's going to have to be, what was it, Florida State when they called the pick play on the winning touchdown and they called it back or whatever. Terrible. I mean, just yes. Was it technically? Yes. But then later on in that season when Clemson ran the exact same play to win the national championship, like, really?
Was it 2 years later, right?
Was it 2? It was
because that was 2014 close. And then they won the title in 2016.
It was relatively close where I was like, really? So that's what it is for me, for sure.
Other than that one, the big one for me is 2009. They ran a screen pass to Armando Allen that he takes for like a 50, 60-yard touchdown. They review the play. It's clear he didn't step out of bounds. At worst, it's too close to overturn it. It didn't matter. They still overturned it. And that was the game they lost 38-34. I have always wondered, how does Charlie Weiss's tenure change if they win that game? Because remember, they beat Nevada in the opener. They won the next 3 games. They beat Michigan State, Purdue, and Washington. Then they lost to USC by a touchdown. And then they kind of fell apart at the end of that year. But, like, does that change how that team finishes if they beat Michigan? Because at one point they were 4-1 and ranked. That was a horrible, horrible call. Plus, I hate losing to Michigan. But Armando, you remember that play, Vince, where Armando was around the sideline on a screen pass?
Yeah.
I thought that was a horrible call. But I think the one that had the biggest impact of any was, in my opinion, was the clip against Notre Dame against Colorado in the Orange Bowl. And was it 90? Would have been the 91 Orange Bowl, correct? So after the 1990 season,
okay,
it was Rockets' last game, I believe, because they beat Colorado the year before. So in Rockets' 3 postseasons, they played West Virginia in the Fiesta Bowl, and then they played back-to-back Orange Bowls against Colorado. He had a big long score in the year before. I think they won like 21-3 or 21-6, something like that. And then the next year they lost 10-9 or 10-6. And then that clip at the end of so that was the last time we got to really see Rocket do something special, was that call. And it got called back, and I didn't think it did. And Bill Walsh was so excited to see a penalty on the play too, which still ticks me off to this day. But yeah, I didn't think that should have been called.
Yeah, exactly.
It wasn't a phantom clip call because the guy did it was close enough to where, you might think about it, but it shouldn't have been, in my opinion. Yeah.
Well, I do remember. What about the MSU overtime field goal fake where the play clock expired?
Yeah,
that was tough.
that one was rough. Yeah, that one was rough.
Yeah.
Oh, dropping dimes has one against Clemson.
Yeah, the worst call. He says the worst call I've seen is when the ball went out of bounds and Notre Dame recovered, but they reversed it. I wonder if Notre Dame goes to win the title in 2018.
And see, that's the part of it that bothers me. It's like the Armando Allen play. If you'd have called it the certain way on the field, I would have understood you not overturning it, even though. So, like on the Armando Allen play, if you'd have called him out of bounds, I wouldn't have liked it. I would have disagreed with it, but I would have understood. Right. It was close enough. If you'd have called Chase Claypool out of bounds initially, I'd have said, hey, I don't think he's out of bounds, but I don't think it's conclusive enough to where you can overturn it. But the fact that they called it correctly on the field and then overturned those calls was inexcusable to me.
Right.
And especially the 2018 game, because, I mean, if Notre Dame gets the ball there, you got 10 yards to go, you're in a score. I mean, if Ian Book makes that throw to Miles Boykin and that play goes the right way, all of a sudden Notre Dame's up 14-0. I mean, who knows what happens there? So those things is why I really hate replay. Because what's the point of having replay if you're going to get it wrong all the time?
Right, exactly.
All the time.
Exactly.
So, it's why I hate that you can't criticize referees. You can't criticize replay officials. You can criticize coaches and players all you want. If you screw up a call that costs us a game, I should be able to rip you.
Right. Because
you know what happens if referees can be ripped? They're going to make sure that they're freaking working as hard as they can to make the right calls, right, and improving their game. So, that one was bad. I mean, there's no excuse to miss it that bad. To not only get it wrong, but then to overturn it.
Right, exactly.
Was just
ridiculous. Yes.
Ridiculous. I think that's it, Vince.
I think we finally hit the finish line. Yes, sir. Right at that 3-hour mark. So
So appreciate everybody being part of the show today. Very, very much. So before you go, remember, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell. If you're listening via podcast, give us a 5-star review, please, very much. If you are someone who has not tried a Built Bar yet, or if you're someone who does like Built Bar, check out the description box below. If you go to BuiltBar.com, you use the promo code Irish Breakdown, one word. I believe it's all caps, but I'm not sure if that's how they put it in there. It's all caps. Use the promo code Irish Breakdown. You get 10% off your entire purchase. So definitely take advantage of that. I love those things. My wife jacked some of my Cherry Garcias today. I'm not thrilled about that, but I love her, and she's done a lot for me, so I'm going to let her have the Cherry Garcia, a few of those Cherry Garcias. So, but anyway, thanks for being with us. We'll be back with you again tomorrow at 1 p.m. to talk more Notre Dame football. So thanks, everybody, for being with us. Vince, you got something to add?
and 5 o'clock.
Yeah, we'll be back tomorrow, 5 o'clock.
Yeah,
to discuss whatever decision Tobias Merriweather makes. And of course, if you have not done so already, boards.irishbreakdown.com. Sign up. You can sign up for a monthly fee. You can sign up for an annual fee. Or if you're someone who's always asked, how can I support you guys? We actually have an Irish Breakdown Booster Club. And you can see it at our boards.irishbreakdown.com. And we've actually had surprisingly a lot of people sign up that way, which is just a way for you to say, hey, look, we're going to support you guys. And we appreciate it very, very much. So anyway, everyone, thanks. Have a great day. Vince and I will be back with you again tomorrow.